October 19, 2017 is called to order. The clerk will please call the roll.
Calling the roll, Ms. Baker? Here. Mr. Miller?
Here.
Mr. Tuma?
Here.
Mr. Gallagher? Here. Mr. Schron? Mr. Schron is absent at the moment. Ms. Conwell? Ms. Conwell is absent at the moment. Mr. Jones? Mr. Jones is absent at the moment. Ms. Brown?
Here.
Mr. Hairston?
Here.
Ms. Simon? Ms. Simon is absent at the moment. Council President Brady?
Here.
You have a quorum.
Okay, thank you very much. And we know that Councilman Schron is representing us at the Investment Advisory Committee, and he will be joining us shortly. Do we have anyone signed in for public comment related to the agenda?
Yes, we do, Mr. Chair. The first person is Stacy O'Brien. If you'd step up to the podium, and you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Welcome to the committee.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Stacy O'Brien, and I am the Legislative Committee Chair for the Council on Older Persons, otherwise known as COOP. COOP is a standing committee of the Center for Community Solutions, which has been in existence for over 70 years, advocating for the needs and interests of older adults in Cuyahoga County. The Division of Senior and Adult Services plays an important role in helping to support the needs of seniors in Cuyahoga County that range from food security to adult protective services to information and referral to long-term care services and supports. As the county ages, the needs of seniors will continue to grow and change. You have heard these statistics before, but they bear repeating. According to the Miami University Scripps School of Gerontology, by the year 2030, 30% of Cuyahoga County residents will be at least age 60 or older. For the first time, older adults in Cuyahoga County will outnumber children. And the needs of the aging population in 2030 will be different than they are today. According to Cleveland State University's 5th migration study, the city of Cleveland is home to the second largest concentration of baby boomers when compared to other cities in the country. We know that access to socialization, nutrition, transportation, and other services that support independent living are critical to both the physical and emotional well-being of older adults. At present, Cuyahoga County has done a commendable job with the resources it has. But my concern and the concern of COOP is that we are not doing enough for this population. It will not be adequate to allocate resources only when the 2030 age wave is upon us. It is prudent to invest in the infrastructure, the innovation activities, and the resources now so that providers can create, test, and refine programs and services that are ready to meet those needs as they arise. We are asking for the Council to heed the DSAS requests for resources, not just in the budget deliberation season, but also for the future needs of our county. Older adults are one of the county's most vulnerable groups. It is our collective responsibility as public servants to ensure we offer quality opportunities that include a full range of programs, services, and supports that allow older adults to age in the setting of their choice. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Next speaker is Reverend Lorenzo Norris.
Welcome to the committee.
Thanks so much, Commissioner, and to the Council. I'm going to be brief. I'm not going to really. I know you have the statistics in terms of senior. We're coming here on behalf of Cleveland Clergy Alliance in partnership with DSAS about a faith-based initiative that we've been working on for 2 years. It's to enhance the gaps in underserved areas where disability in adults 55 and older, those gaps include, one, knowledge about services. Secondly, accessibility to services that already exists within the county. And thirdly, deals with loneliness and separation and depression and mental illness of adults. This project has been going on through focus group and with 10 churches. And our proposal primarily include navigators in 10 churches that will work with seniors inside of the churches in the broader communities. These are underserved areas. Seniors don't have transportation. They fear safety. Many, for example, even in my church, it's strange. I was wondering why seniors were just taking food home. So we began to plan when we had food to prepare more for seniors. And it continued for over a month. Then it came to the conclusion, looking at all the data, seniors are going hungry at the end of the month, along with Medicare and other things. And what we want to do is enhance the programs in your senior centers. And we're asking that you look at this collaboration and this working partnership and consider funding this initiative. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. We're aware of your proposal and we'll consider it as part of our process.
Also with the Reverend is Mary Rice and then Dr. Andrew Clark.
My comments as well will be very, very brief because the previous two speakers actually spoke on the issue as far as seniors in Cuyahoga County and the need for additional services, not just for food services, but the fact that many of them live in isolation. So many of our senior citizens, and most of you know, we were born in a generation where they say you don't take the problems that's within the home outside the home. And so therefore they're not sharing the problems and concerns that they're having. Living in isolation, friends are no longer there or have moved away or have died. And those concerns are, we need to develop programs where seniors no longer live in isolation, who are able to get out and avail themselves to the services provided by many of the organizations. And that's the one point that I wanted to bring out, the isolation of our senior citizens and how grants and this proposal in specific can help with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And I'm Dr. Andrew Clark, pastor of Trinity Outreach Ministries, Church of God in Christ, as well as a member of the Cleveland Clergy Alliance. And my colleagues have just spoken. Let me just place some emphasis on the amount of time that we spent in research and conducting the various focus groups and various sectors of our community. And it's really, it was really very difficult to hear some of the pains that were being uttered from some of our senior citizens. We are equipped as a church, as a faith-based community, to handle some of these very sensitive issues. And the research was thorough. We took our time, and the word is that the church can do something, and we just need the equipment, need the resources to make a difference. And so I just wanted to place special emphasis on the amount of time that we put in the research and developing this plan. We can put some smiles back on our senior citizens' faces, and the church can better do that in so many ways. Thank you so much for this time.
Thank you for your testimony. I'd like to note that Vice President Jones has joined the meeting, and who is next, Ms. Jean?
Wendy Satin.
Okay.
Good morning. I am the Executive Director of the Community Partnership on Aging, which provides services and resources to seniors in a 5-city area: South Euclid, Lyndhurst, Highland Heights, Mayfield Heights, and Mayfield Village. We receive critical funds from the Department of Senior Adult Services to assist with transportation, congregate meals, and social work services for our residents in the 5 cities. We are appreciative of DSAS and the Council's support of these critical resources. However, I am here in another role, a second role. I am a collaborative partner in a program called CARE. CARE is one of the recipients of DSAS's forward-thinking challenge to us all to come up with some innovations in senior center programming. CARE is a collaboration of 8 cities in Cuyahoga County that brings basic home maintenance, performed all by volunteers, to seniors in 8 cities, our 5 cities, plus Cleveland Heights, Maple Heights, and Solon. We have been asked by several other cities to bring the program out to them, so there's definitely opportunity for expansion of the program. I believe that you all have letters from our 8 mayors in your packets, the mayors attesting to the value and impact of CARE to their residents in their cities. We began the program in April of this year and have already made some great inroads in signing up people to be part of the program. The help by our CARE volunteers assist residents to stay in their homes and in their communities longer and on their own terms. We are appreciative of the council's support of DSAS and of supporting the Senior Center Innovation Fund, and we ask that you consider DSAS's request in a favorable light. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
The next speaker is Dabney Conwell.
Good morning. Welcome to the committee.
Good morning. Thank you. My name is Dabney Conwell, and I'm from Benjamin Rose Institute on Aging. And we thank you for your support of DSAS and its missions. But today I'm here to represent one of the senior innovation programs as well. On behalf of our coordinated programming initiative, also known as the One Call for Wellness, and its partners and CBOs, community-based organizations, we thank you for your past support and continued support. With your support, we have created the opportunity to connect senior-serving organizations with best practice programs that assist seniors in aging well. By using a one call to inquire, request, and receive those best practice programs in local community organizations or settings. The partners include the Cleveland Food Bank, ESOP, Fair Hill Partners, Rose Centers for Aging Well, and the City of Cleveland Department on Aging. Your continued support will ensure our older adults age well in the community. Thank you so much for your support.
Thank you very much.
And finally, Ms. Liu.
Good morning. Welcome to the committee.
Good morning. Thank you for having all of us. I'm Lou, and you know I have addressed certain issues here constantly, but today I have to address part of these issues more also on senior citizens too. When all these people coming up here saying we need a budget for the senior citizens for all kind of services, please also think about towards the first half of this year in one of the meetings, one of a senior citizens in homeless shelter, she actually came up here to tell you what type of a situation she's in when she couldn't really stay at her own place. Doesn't matter a house or a rental property. The shelter condition is really bad, physically and personnel-wise. However, same thing. For the homeless system, the budget is the same as before. And we know all the costs all went up with inflation. However, OHS cannot really accommodate with any lineage with the promising service provider. And she went back to the old one, which was a very bad move. In that case, doesn't matter young or old, people in the homeless shelters still cannot get a service they actually will receive when county has a full intention to do so. Please help. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Ms. Jean, would you please read the resolution for us?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Resolution number 2017-0182, adopting the 2018-2019 biennial operating budget and capital improvements program and declaring the necessity that this resolution become immediately effective.
Thank you very much. I would like to welcome everybody to our budget hearings. Today we're going to be focusing on Health and Human Services. It's a very important day. And to frame our discussion, I would like to call everybody on council's attention to the one-page sheet that I passed out that's headed by saying food assistance eligibility. And for those out in the audience, this document simply says that we're looking at how many residents in Cuyahoga County are at 200% of poverty or less. This is a general indicator of eligibility for health and human services programs. And in 1999, it was 390,000, which is 29%. In 2005 to 2009, at the beginning of the Great Recession, it was 430,000, or 34%, and the most recent numbers for 2011 to 2015 is 460,000, or 37%, meaning that even though we've come out of recession, the number of people who are in need and eligible for many of these programs is still increasing, suggesting that there's structural problems in our economy and that that there's jobs available, but a lot of them aren't good enough to support a family. So that's the environment that we're working under. The second thing that I'd like to say is that we have a lot on the agenda today, and I know that that every agency and department would like to take this opportunity to showcase everything that they've done over the last year or two and talk about how important the services are of their agency. And we know how important this is, but we just have a long agenda and a lot to focus on. So I'm just really asking directors to help us by focusing specifically on what the budget issues are that face their agency and what's being presented. The final thing I want to say by way of introduction is to express concern about the fact that the council has not yet received budget books, and the budget books are critical to the council having the background information they need to ask good questions at the budget hearings. So not having the budget books at today's session is going to impair the work that we can do. And I know that this is not intentional, and I'm presuming that OBM has some pretty serious technical problems, but I would implore the administration to please redouble your efforts to correct the situation as soon as possible. I'd like to note that Councilman Tron has joined us. He was at the Investment Advisory Committee representing us there and now is here. Thank you very much. And Council President Brady.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to echo the comments of the Finance Chairman about the budget books. The Council has been very patient and very cooperative over the last several weeks in getting information about this budget. And we have, I think, reached the point where we cannot any longer not express our concern and really the desire and need for an explanation. If this is a matter of a technical matter of some kind, then please let us know. But we've been assured that we would have these books. This is a normal part of the process, and the administration is not keeping up with this process. And if they want cooperation in the ability of the council to help them work through this budget, balance this budget, and pass a budget, then they need to work harder with us to make that happen. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. We are going to start our session this morning with an overview presentation from the Acting Director of Health and Human Services, Mr. Walter Parfiowicz, and I would like to congratulate you on your appointment as interim director. It's a very, very important responsibility, and the appointment reflects your years and years of service to our county, for which we're grateful.
Thank you.
Please proceed.
Okay, I'm here presenting on the Health and Human Services budget for 2018-19. We will follow Councilman Miller's format, keeping all presentations to no more than 5 minutes to allow for discussion follow-up from council. The Department of Health and Human Services budget is approximately $336 million with 2,262 budgeted staff. The revenue portion of our budget is made up of state, federal, and health and human service levy dollars. The revenue budget includes a $7.6 million increase in federal revenue. This $7.6 million increase was used initially to offset some of the $13 million in reductions that were proposed. Some of those reductions that were restored were board and care, neighborhood collaboratives, and the adoption contracts. The expenditure portion of our budget includes both additions and reductions. As many of you may know, there's a 2% increase as a cost of living adjustment. There's a 6% increase for health care. We also have $7.1 million of reductions in overtime, contracts, and client services. Two things I want to say about the reductions. The reductions are all budgeted dollars that we historically have not spent. Secondly, the county executive has designated the same $7 million in the Health and Human Service Levy Fund to cover any of these reductions that do not materialize. We're not eliminating or reducing any programs, initiatives, or services in this budget. We're not adding or reducing personnel. Our budget FT levels for 2018 and 2019 are the same as the levels in 2017. Overall, we do not foresee any issues with this budget. Open it up to questions or stop here for questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Questions by my colleagues on the overview? Okay, thank you very much.
I will introduce Dr. Richard Jones from the Senior Adult Services. You'll be up next.
Good morning.
Good morning.
In my role as the administrator for the Division of Senior Adult Services, I want to comment on the budget, but I also want to comment on some of the data that was presented by those who participated in the public comment section. I think it's important just to have a context for our budget. And the realities are that the senior population is really growing, both nationally as well as in our local community. And just to give you another reference, in addition to the data that was presented, there are now 47 million Americans who are 65 years of age and older. That number will actually climb to over 72 million in 2030. So that's a very pivotal time that we are all facing in our world because of the implications it does have around services and also programs. So that's just a comment I want to make. The budget that is proposed by the executive actually for our division includes a 4% increase, which represents $800,000. So this means our budget will move from the current level of $18,215,000 to a future level as proposed of $19,023,000. That is a very good kind of proposal and a good direction for us to move in because it will allow us to actually accomplish 4 major goals. The first goal is to maintain our current levels of service and our current staffing. The bulk of the funding increase that I mentioned will be used for personnel salary increases. We already commented about that in Walter's presentation. And there will be an allocation made in order to cover those costs associated with rising health care. The other items, though, that I'm really appreciative of is that through the addition of $800,000, we've also realigned some of the expense items So this realignment will enable us to maintain a number of initiatives that you heard commented about earlier, namely the Special Senior Center Innovation Fund. So we'll be able to maintain the CARE program. We'll be able to maintain also the One Call for Wellness. And there's another program that you have not heard about that will be launched in Olmsted Falls once this program has been presented to the Board of Control. That is called the paramedicine model. What I really like about this model is an alternative to expensive care in the emergency room. It's an alternative kind of strategy to work with older persons to help them really kind of avoid going into a medical crisis that they cannot afford. So we'll hear more about that. But those three programs will constitute the programs that are funded through the Senior Center Innovation Fund. And because, again, of some realignment, we have a capacity to fund 2 additional programs. So overall, we will fund 5 programs under the Senior Center Innovation Project. There are 2 other areas that we also plan to increase. One is around our emergency fund. This year, we really experienced a considerable demand being placed on us because of the economy. And we will be able to increase that line item from the current $50,000 level to $100,000 level by adding an additional $50,000. And then we'll also be able to address the bed bug issue more effectively. We are currently have a line item in our budget for $100,000 in order to address the bed bug issue in our community. We're going to increase that line item by an additional $50,000. Again, this is a major problem that is impacting all of Cuyahoga County. And because of the additional funding in this area, we'll be able to help address this issue in over 200 homes. So those are 4 major outcomes that we'll be able to focus on as we continue to provide services to more than 30,000 older persons who are living in Cuyahoga County. Let me just say that, Councilman Miller, because this is an initiative that you really are responsible for, and that is the Health and Human Services Strategic Plan. The department, each of our divisions have been asked to really complete a strategic plan that is integrated with the overall comprehensive Health and Human Services strategic plan. Our division has worked on that for the past several months. We have submitted our proposal. That plan has not been fully integrated, but at some point we hope to come back before the council and share with you what the comprehensive Health and Human Services plan looks like that will incorporate many of the proposals, many of the strategies that each division, including our division, have also incorporated into that document. So several weeks ago, the former director, Presto, gave you an overview, but there is a much more comprehensive document that will evolve once we go through that vetting process. And finally, I just wanted to make the comment that this budget that's proposed by the executive will enable our division to continue the vital and integral role that we continue to assume in the aging network in Cuyahoga County. It's a very fragile network. And the role that Cuyahoga County plays is significant. So this budget of $19 million will play a very critical role in our ability to really sustain the kinds of services and kinds of programs that we are currently providing to older persons in Cuyahoga County. But just for future thought that I just want to mention to you is that the growth of this population poses challenges and poses opportunities, not only in Cuyahoga County, but also in the state, across the state of Ohio. The Center for Community Solutions will shortly publish a study which compares per capita spending rates based on levies operating in several counties throughout the state. In Cuyahoga County, it's estimated that we spend on a per capita basis using our levy dollars, $55 per senior. In Hamilton County, they spend $137, Franklin County $158, and in Belmont County $164. This dramatic growth in this population will also require that we find ways to enhance and also to increase funding and explore the development of new service approaches, such as increasing funding for the options program, creating an older person's employment service, enhancing the adult protective services with the addition of a geriatric mental health specialist, seeking or seeding the Navigator Project as proposed by Cleveland Clergy Alliance, and resurrecting the kinship care program that will focus on grandparents through a collaboration with DCFS. I want to conclude by expressing my appreciation to the executive and also to the members of the council for your support of programs that serve older persons in Cuyahoga County. So I'll stop there.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Questions by my colleagues, and we have a lot. So we're gonna start with Vice President Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, thank you, Dr. Jones, for the presentation. Will any of your programming services have a waiting list for next year?
I acknowledge that periodically, particularly in our options program, we do face waiting lists. We have a waiting list currently of about 30 older persons who are on the waiting list for homemaking services, for transportation, and also for our emergency response program. We're in the process of monitoring that request and those waiting lists very carefully. Our staff are really monitoring an opportunity to change that on a weekly basis. So we're hoping that over the next 2 to 3 week period, we'll be able to absorb that waiting list as quickly as possible, because some persons who are currently receiving service will roll off service. So we'll bring these new requests on board. We have something called disenrollment, where someone chooses, because of a change in their status, they may be going to a nursing home, or they may be moving into a home with a relative. So they no longer are interested in receiving service for DSAS. That will open up a slot for those persons on a waiting list. So we really do manage our waiting list as close as we possibly can.
Dr. Jones, have you? Thank you. Have you had a chance to vet the initiative that we just heard in the public comment from the Clergy Alliance? Give me a sense of what interaction you've had to this point.
Right now, that particular proposal has been worked on within our division for the past 2 years through our faith-based initiative committee. And I just want to commend them for excellent work. The proposal, the idea of the proposal was initially presented to Director Pristo when he was in his past role. That proposal has not moved through the vetting process. There was a commitment made that we will review that proposal at some point in the future. But to your question, we have not completed the vetting process. So the idea that are included in the proposal have yet to be reviewed beyond the team within our division. We feel that the proposal has strong merit. We like the Navigator concept. It's based on solid research, great evidence-based work in the literature. So we think it offers a lot of promise. And I'm hoping that at some point, with Walter and the leadership of Health and Human Services, we'll have an opportunity to present what I think is a proposal that does bear further consideration in our deliberations.
And by proposal, do you mean a proposal in partnership with those who are presented today?
Definitely in partnership with the Cleveland Clergy Alliance. I like the idea, again, of using community residents as navigators to help connect older persons with services. You heard about the issue of social isolation. That's very big in this community. And just to give you a sense of the risk involved, we are actually, there's research that clearly establishes that if an older person is isolated and lonely, that's the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So it gives you some notion of what the health risks are associated with that. So one of the reasons I like the Navigator concept is that it really allows us to connect, with those people who are really isolated and who are currently not connected to programs and services for any number of reasons. When you're at this age, you have fewer friends. When you're at this age, you experience greater losses, and you find yourself in a very, very restricted environment. So I like the idea of really being able to go out into the community, knocking on doors, and really identifying where these people are located.
So, and Mr. Chairman, if I may, since you have not completed your vetting process, can I assume it's not in the budget book that will be presented to us at some point?
That's clear. That's correct.
What is the dollar amount?
The request is for $300,000 in order to fund 10 navigators and also a coordinator position.
Okay, and my last question, Mr. Chairman, these navigators, you and I, about a year ago, we had many conversations around Maple Heights and the concept of a navigator to replace the loss of the center that was in the plaza in Maple Heights. Is this similar, connected in any way, or two different
Very, very
issues?
similar, and for the time that the navigator was working out of the Maple Heights Senior Center, it proved to be highly successful and very, very effective. I had an opportunity to talk with the staff at Maple Heights. They were very, very impressed with the outcomes and with how effective that navigator was in terms of connecting people with programs and services. So it proved to be very successful.
So this seems to be a model based off of the success that was had in Maple Heights?
In Maple Heights, and also there's a body of research that we refer to as evidence-based that clearly establishes that this model has merit and offers tremendous promise, and we're able to achieve incredible outcomes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Ms. Conwell is now present with us and is the next questioner, and will be followed by Councilpersons Brown, Hairston, and Gallagher. Ms. Conwell.
Through the chair to the director, you've stood before us, the committee of the whole, several times and told us about a senior tsunami coming. Has there been any serious discussions regarding how the county can move the needle forward in terms of increasing the budget to prepare for this tsunami with you?
The county, and to leadership's credit, they have really looked at me as to be the spokesperson on behalf of older persons living in our community. I acknowledge that. And I also want to acknowledge that since our budget is currently $18,200,000, and the proposed budget is going to $19,023,000, that is a very significant direction to move in. Because if you recall, 2 years ago, I was standing before you and we were looking at a proposed 10% reduction. So that the scenario we're looking at now is very different from the one that we were looking at in 2015 when we were looking at the budget for 16 and 17. So I'm really pleased about this. And the HHS leadership, the former director, everyone is really asking me, what are your thoughts? What are your impressions? What recommendations do you have? I have really reflected more of that in terms of the strategic plan that we have proposed. So our strategic plan includes recognition of a number of projects. Those projects have yet to be vetted. I think because we're going through a leadership transition, and I'm very appreciative that Walter P. is in his current role. But we will continue to actually review, I think, the recommendations that have been compiled. Again, I reviewed these with the former director. I want to continue to have that opportunity to process them with the current leadership, since both Walter and Dave Merrill will be playing critical roles in terms of assuming responsibility for processing many of the recommendations that are coming out of our division through the strategic planning process.
Dr. Jones, we met earlier in the spring and you laid out kind of what the needs were. Mm-hmm. Has there been, in your strategic plan that you're working on, is there a timeline to base out that dollar amount that you had stated earlier with me?
In the preliminary discussions that we had about the direction our division was going with the strategic plan, I really identified 5 or 6 programs. Those included the Older Persons Employment Program. They included some consideration to expand our options program. They also included taking a hard look at Adult Protective Services. Adult Protective Services is now actually providing services to older persons who are presenting complex issues, and we're seeing increase in mental illness issues, with that population. So I'm recommending that when we get an opportunity, we add a geriatric mental health person on board with our Adult Protective Services group, so we have more capacity really to conduct the kinds of assessments we need to conduct with older persons who are presenting those complex issues. So those are some of the ideas I was proposing early on. I have laid those out in a plan that was presented to, again, former Director Pristo. Those ideas have not moved beyond those discussions. So my hope is that at some point very early on, the request for an additional $2.5 million will be vetted with Walter, with Dave Merriman, and with the appropriate leadership from the executive's office. All
right, Dr. Jones, I just want to comment, you just stated about the senior employment program was one of the initiatives or the ideas that you're thinking of moving forward. And in Health and Human Services Committee yesterday, we had Cleveland Food Bank presenting, and that was one of the major items that correlate to the need for food, is that seniors want to be out there and working, and that there's limited programs, but those seniors that are working are really benefiting from that additional income just to get food on their table.
Yeah, it's very interesting, Councilwoman Conwell. When I joined you at a meeting at Abington Arms, I was really struck when I asked the group there, what other services would you request? I thought they were going to ask for homemaking services, emergency response, when someone said, I want a job. And that really got me thinking that some seniors really want to work now. They want to work beyond 65. They want to work in their 70s. That is a new trend we're seeing. So in our division, we would like to respond to that trend.
Thank you.
Ms. Brown.
Good morning, Dr. Jones. My question is with regards to the faith-based initiative that has been presented. You said that this has been a work in progress for 2 years now.
Yes.
Can you elaborate a little bit on why the delay or in getting it vetted and why we're just seeing it at this point?
I think that, to be honest with you, we did a great job of conducting surveys. We did a great job of conducting literature reviews. We did a great job of reaching out to the congregations who are represented by the 10 churches who are part of the Cleveland Clergy Alliance. So I have to say that our due diligence was very comprehensive. It was very thorough. So that the ideas that are included in the proposal that the Cleveland Clergy Alliance is presenting have been well thought out and extremely well vetted internally within our division. Our division has also gone through some internal leadership turnover, so that slowed it down for a while, and I acknowledge that. But I think that the final product that we came up with is well thought out and something that we can all take great pride in. And I just have to acknowledge that Reverend Norris, Dr. McKinney, and also from our team, we had a lot of vetting around the writing of the proposal, but it came together, and again, we're very proud of the final product that we come up with.
Now, with the Cleveland Clergy Alliance, are there only 10 churches that are members of that alliance, or?
There are 10 churches that are very active, but the alliance is larger than that.
Okay. Yeah. And so is that how the 10 participating churches were determined? Because I would think that we would, activity would also be a factor, but as well as the locations of where seniors are most likely to be able to receive.
Right. I think
services.
we think about the Cleveland Clergy Alliance as a core group, but that core has the capacity to really connect with other faith-based organizations. Again, it's a model that we are interested in because it's a collaboration and a partnership that would entail outreach to not only the faith-based community, but we'll be connecting and working with the nonprofit, many members of the nonprofit sector as well.
Okay, and then I guess the last question is the request for that particular proposal is $300,000 with some, I'm guessing, some potential overlap in services. Mm-hmm. Is there some conversations on how we can do that more efficiently, I guess?
There are some discussions about how we might review the model and how we can really look at efficiencies, but we think that the core is there, the ideas are there. And so we want to explore those. We would like to try them out, kind of refine the model as we move ahead, but we feel we have a place where we can really move ahead, and we're very excited about it.
Okay, and then the one last question. I understand we have the names of the churches, but if you could kindly provide the addresses so we can kind of get a sense of East Side, West Side, and how these churches are located in the county. I think that would be helpful.
Just a comment. There are 4 districts from the districts represented here that are part of this initiative. So.
Okay, Mr. Hairston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To Dr. Jones, always a pleasure to see you and always to hear some of the good work that you are doing and some of your ideas that I think many from the administration, the other directors, and even this council should begin to really hear you and make those meaningful steps to implement some of those programs. I know some of my questions that were answered, well, a lot of the questions were asked by my colleagues, but I do still have a few other items for you. You talked about one of the critical services after Mr. Jones asked about the waiting list. What other critical services or programs that you see will still have a waiting list? We know that the increase in $50,000 for the bed bug program, will there still be a number of people who will be waiting in line to receive those services? Because we've seen that population or the need for that grow drastically within the last year or within the last few months. And other services or programs that you see that will have a long waiting list, but that are critical to the health and well-being to our older population.
That's a good question. We actually are operating 5 what we call centers of excellence. So I think about adult protective services, home support, our options program, the community social service program, which encompasses the 40 senior centers that we are currently funding. And when I think about need, there's a heavy demand primarily in the options program. And that's probably because of the array of programs and services that we are making available to older persons. I mentioned homemaking services, home delivered meals, emergency response, personal care. There are real high demands on that. So that tends to be the place where we see high demand. For the bed bug program, we have had, in fact, we are processing now at least 35 new requests for treatment of bed bugs in the program, in the houses that we are currently serving. We will be able to, because we have realigned again some of our budget, so that with moving from 100,000 to 150,000 in the bed bug program, that will give us the capacity that we need. That's what we're forecasting. Because the population is growing, we'll probably have to grow that program incrementally every year. That's just a fact of life. So that will continue. So we'll see that program probably increase every year. We began, thanks to the leadership of Councilwoman Conwell, with $25,000 allocation in 2014, and now in 2017 we're 100,000, and we're proposing to move to 150,000 in 2018.
In the 50,000, you stated was realignment of your budget, not an actual increase to your budget.
Right. We realigned some items in our client services line item, and we moved it to our contract line item, so we could really expand the contract with Terminex.
So what does that do with client services? Does that limit the people who are affected to serve there? What does that do for that part of your program?
What we did is we were looking at some contracts that were underperforming and moved those dollars around. So it did not impact the number, because we're really, all my team members know I'm really big on moving those dollars out and making sure we're hitting our target numbers and making sure we're doing an effective job of it. But if there was a contract that was not functioning at the optimal level, we would just take a few dollars off those contracts, and then we reassign them to the Terminex contract.
Thank you. Although you mentioned the scenario has changed, but looking at our budget versus other counties around the state, we significantly fall short, and we have consistently fell short time and time again. And when Dr. Rice came up and spoke about isolation of seniors, and you spoke about isolation of seniors and how it affects so many other things, and it creates so many other problems. And I look at your food insecurity chart. You have home delivered meals 896 and congregate meals 280. How much of that $1.1 million are we serving of the population who are in need here in the county of the congregate meals specifically, but also the home delivered meals?
What percentage you mean of the overall Cuyahoga County?
Yes.
When I really think about the fact that we are now serving 30,000 people. Think about the fact that the number of older persons in Cuyahoga County now is approximately 270,000 when we look at the 60-year-old plus group. And that's how I think about older.
Sure.
That's my line of demarcation. So that when you look at those numbers, and when I look at the number that we are serving, then my argument would be that we are serving overall, at least when I look at the 30,000 out against the 270,000, that we are at least about the 10% level. That's where we are. And I think we are making strides. We're moving. We're doing a much more effective job. Again, I want to acknowledge that this $800,000 and moving our budget to $19 million is a step in the right direction, so I'm really pleased. But that growth has to occur every year in the budget in order to keep up with the population growth.
And so I thank you for that. And so that was actually moving to that point that as we serving 10% of those 200 plus thousand, but we increase by 800,000, but every year the need becomes greater. Yeah. And so we never really catch up to the point where we should be, right? And so we continue as a cat chasing our tail. We continue to do this roundabout, but we never really make the dent that we should be making or support the people that we should be supporting in this county. Looking at the centers that you have listed here, the folks who we do service, and specifically when you and I met and toured the East Cleveland Center, and East Cleveland being one of the most impoverished cities within the state of Ohio. And looking at the level of funding that is allocated to that center or for that programming versus some of the others, it lack of a better term, it don't add up. And when we look at overall support of the centers that we have here in the waiting list, because I don't recall what the numbers were, that people who were in need of home delivered meals from that, not that center, but just that area, that region, was still relatively high. And even the congregate meals, we were able to serve a small number, which is helpful. It's small but helpful. but looking at the folks that we could serve because of the capacity or levels that we can support based on the size of the center, only a few more dollars will be able to help some of the needs in the folks who we support in the community. And
yeah, I mean, that's a good point. We spend right now about $1.9 million on support for the senior centers, the 40 that we serve. We know that, I just got the data from one of our fiscal people, that even though we provide that kind of funding, they're making up an additional $400,000 out of their own pockets because of the gap. And so those centers have indicated to me, we're still short, and that's across the board. So I think we're doing what we possibly can do with the monies that we have allocated for that program. But you're correct. There are still gaps that we are facing. There are still demands that are out there. But we're doing, I think, the best we can with the resources that we have to work with right now. So.
And I thank you for those comments. But like I know that at least if the folks can eat, then they can function. Yeah, that's right? Very good comment. If they can't eat, they can't function, then everything else, it goes downhill. The decline will be steep.
Good comment. And for the record, we are spending right now about $1,100,000 for our food program, and we're working very closely with the other departments to do more outreach to see how we can connect more older people with the SNAP program. We know there's research. You have all read the articles that over 200,000 Ohioans have been determined to be eligible for this food stamp program, but are currently not enrolled in the food stamp program. So there's a lot of outreach, and we are part of that outreach.
Sure, the outreach is great, and I'm sure we all appreciate that, but you know what it means to be a part of a congregate meal. Yes. It's not just about the plate that is put in front of you, but it's about being in the room with folks, because we all, because they're experiencing different things in life, lost, death, and right. Friends who are people are moving, just family who are non-existent anymore.
The social connection,
the social emotional connection,
really
very critical to as we aid our older person population here in the county. Lastly, thank you. Lastly, Mr. Chair, if I could, just kind of being forward thinking here and just kind of looking to the future. If you had an extra $1 million in your budget, what would you do with it?
If I had an additional $1 million in my budget, there would be several options I would look at. One possibility would be to add geriatric mental health capacity in the Adult Protective Services group, because I think that's very important. The second thing I would probably do is to look at how I could give some consideration to the Cleveland Clergy Alliance proposal. The other thing I would do is expand the options program and really create a unit in that program. And then I would also look at ways of expanding the kind of work we are engaged in with the Senior Center Innovation Program. So those would be 4 areas I would look at. I would stretch that $1 million extremely well.
Did you repeat the fourth one again?
Repeat the fourth one.
Senior innovation.
Oh, senior innovation.
Okay, they got it. Well, listen, I appreciate that, and although I know you've mentioned them over the course of your presentation, but I wanted to hear them again, and for other folks to hear what those services would be. This isn't for additional salary, the $1 million. It wouldn't be for additional benefits for folks. It will actually be for an additional services that are critical to the success of our older population here in Cuyahoga County, which means the success of our community, because those are the folks who have paved the way for us to sit here and be here. And quite frankly, it's our responsibility to take care of those individuals.
Totally agree. Tomorrow I'll be in Atlanta serving as a keynote speaker for a major conference there. Yes. And I'll be talking about social isolation and talking about older people. And my point is that this is a phenomena that is impacting the country. It's not only just Cuyahoga County, but it's the country. And my position is that we have an opportunity to be a role model for the country So we want to seize that opportunity to do what we can on behalf of older people in our county.
Absolutely, and my last comment, Mr. Chairman, as we make these investments in other places, how we're going to be a leader, we're going to be an innovator. This is one way that we can set that tone as well and be a leader in this field. As my colleague Mr. Gallagher would say many times, we have to take care of the older population. Thank you.
Thank you.
Speaking of Mr. Gallagher, he's next.
Dr. Jones, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
I think it goes unsaid what I think about you and what you do and how you do it.
Thank you.
And you've helped me, and I greatly appreciate that. It saddens me, though, that I didn't realize that your demarcation point of what you consider elderly I passed last year. So, do I get a card or something?
It's the ear of wisdom, Councilman Gallagher.
I need some work on that. I will, however, commend the executive and his team for recognizing the need. And I understand, and I think everyone up here understands, we're not going to ever reach the total of what you need to reach the population that's in need. And I think that could be said for every division within HHS and every division within this county. There's only so much we can do. Yet again, another budget battle and bad time. I shouldn't say battle, but it's a bad time. Last budget cycle was very bad, as you experienced. Things had to be done, and I was happy we could provide what we did provide, and we work, I think, pretty well with the executive team in trying to do that. If you could, the Miami study, if you could get us a copy of that, I'd appreciate it, because I'd want to juxtapose not just the population increase in seniors going into 2030 from today, but I'd like to juxtapose not the increase in seniors with those in need, because I know not every senior is going to be in need, and there's got to be some calculation on percentage of those in need and what we're serving. And I'm sure we're way below certainly where we need to be, but getting an idea of where we need to at least have a target would be helpful.
I will make sure that I provide you with copies of the Miami University. The Scripps Center is an authoritative facility for us to really draw down information about older persons in our state. But I also want to cite there's research coming out of the Center for Community Solutions. They are going to provide each of you with information about your district. And that district information will include a profile on older persons in your district. So I'm going to ask that they include in that revision some profiling of what the economic strata look like, so you get a better appreciation for what that looks like across the 11 districts and for the county. I'm working very closely with them. Then there's another small group of us. The McGregor Foundation is convening a small task force to really look at how we can really go deeper with analyzing the challenges that are currently facing older people in our community. So there are a lot of rich databases that are beginning to emerge that we can tap into that can augment the information that will be coming out of the Scripps Center on Gerontology.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I had many other questions, but my good friend Mr. Hairston hit them all. Thank you.
Mr. Director, the funding for the options program and APS, is it basically the same as the prior year, or is there some increase?
We have a slight increase we'll experience in the options program. Again, that's because of the bulk of the $800,000 the increase is being used for the 2% salary increase, as well as to cover the costs associated with health care. We have realigned our budget so we could really bump up the options program funding, knowing that that's where we have a high demand. The Adult Protective Services program, I hope that we will be able to augment again through a different kind of staffing configuration that I want to look at with looking at this notion of bringing on a geriatric mental health specialist, because I think that's important. So the adjustments primarily been made on the options side of the table and not on the side of the table for APS. APS is about the same level. We are providing services to 2,300 Adult Protective Services clients, And I just want to make one comment. Adult protective services is a very important issue. You'd be surprised that we are forecasting over 150,000 adults in Ohio are at risk for abuse, exploitation, neglect, and self-neglect. This is a serious problem. So.
Okay. Ms. Baker.
Thank you, and thank you, Dr. Jones, for being here today. Something we really haven't touched on, and first of all, you probably said this already, but I may have missed it. What is the percentage of the population now that is at the 60 age and older?
Right now, currently, we're at about 22% of the population of Cuyahoga County is at that 60-plus level, and that represents about 270,000 older persons. Excuse me, Councilman Gallagher, between the ages of 60
and a few others
older.
of us.
So, and then we're forecasting that that number will hit by 2030. Will be at 31%. The reason we keep emphasizing that because there will be, for the first time in history, more persons that are at that 60-plus level than there will be persons 19 years of age and younger, which is very dramatic when we look at demographic shifts in our population. So.
Thank you. The reason I asked that is that's 13 years from now.
Yes.
So, I would hope that in those 13 years, and I know the executive certainly has his focus on this, that we try to increase from that 69% to a higher level of young workers living and working in Cuyahoga County. And to do that is to create a good business environment, encourage workforce training, good education, and create a stronger tax base so that we can contribute to those that we know by 2030 are going to be in greater need. So I would, really encourage that we think about that end of the spectrum too, and that hopefully by 2030, that 31% that we're talking about now will be a lower percentage based on younger families and people and better, hopefully, performing jobs that create a higher wage can help with the tax base when we get there to that year.
It's a good point, and I think that in the strategic plan for the county, there's a real, as you know, significant focus on economic development. So I definitely support wholeheartedly your comment about that point.
If I may just add, we have lost significant population in Cuyahoga County, so there certainly is room to grow. That is not, I don't think, an outrageous suggestion that we could bring population back. I guess I'm just saying that population hopefully will be the younger families and working 25, 35, 45-year-olds that can help enhance our tax base to help the seniors that we know will be there in 2013.
Totally agree. Councilwoman Baker, I was in Chicago for 13 years, and I'm back to home, Cleveland, so I appreciate that.
Yeah, that's all I'll say.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, Director, thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm leaving now, not because of the questions, but I have a keynote to give them out. I really have to leave, but thank you very much for everything.
Okay, and I am hoping that this area was associated with an unusually large number of questions because we're not on a pace that will get us where we need to get. So next we would like to bring forward Ms. Valeria Harper, and congratulations, Director, on your new appointment.
Thank you.
And we welcome you to the committee to present for the Adams Board.
Well, good morning.
Good morning.
I'd first like to open by saying thank you. Thank you for all of the support that you have rendered on behalf of the citizens of Cuyahoga County through the generous support of your Health and Human Service levy dollars that goes towards programs and services that benefit individuals, families, and their advocates suffering and living life with mental illness and or addiction. And as some of you may know, I have little skill sets when it comes to this PowerPoint, so thank you for your help. You have at your place setting materials that we've prepared some of which would be a duplicate, if you will, of an earlier presentation that was provided to the Health and Human Service Committee, chaired by Councilwoman Yvonne Conwell. In addition to that, in your packet, you have a different version, if you will, that illustrates the services provided for individuals with mental illness, and then the subsequent document gives a breakout and definitions of services provided for those with substance use disorders. I, as the new Chief Executive Officer for the Alcohol, Drug Addiction, and Mental Health Services Board, was very compliant in following the instructions of the memo that was issued on September 17th. So our PowerPoint this morning is in direct response to those questions. I further noted that I had all of 5 minutes, so I will try to, and not in a psychotic way, have rapid speech, but certainly try to take full advantage of your attention this morning and adhere to the 5-minute presentation. The second question in the packet was, what is the Adams Board's overall biannual budget overview? And the county executive has recommended $39 million for calendar years 2018-2019, which is the same level funding from previous year 2016 and 17. Overall, the Adams budget is roughly $60 million. That is inclusive of a generous amount of federal pass-through dollars as well as minimal, modest state funding. The board will be strained to continue some of our individual services that are not covered by insurances, such as our crisis, detoxification, residential treatment, recovery, and sober housing. However, it's important for council to note that the state funding over the past 4 years is $5 million less for the Adams Board. And as all of us are aware, we remain in the midst of a very serious heroin crisis. We were then asked to identify increased expenditures and new initiatives. So I pointed out 2 that I think would be of interest to council this morning. 2 of many that we're working on with the Adams Board. The expansion of our prevention and early interventions initiatives. Many of you are aware that prevention dollars have historically been earmarked for those youth at risk, has been the phrase. And so what we're planning to do, not only in response to the opioid and heroin crisis, but I think it's very important that we begin to expand our prevention and early intervention services to include adults, and particularly our young adults, as well as our older population, as so noted by Dr. Jones in his earlier presentation. In addition to that, our second most costly service for the Adams Board, for the citizens in Cuyahoga County, is our crisis services. Our goal in calendar year 2018 is to, first of all, engage the community in an assessment of the need for crisis intervention services for children and adults, with the goal to enhance our crisis continuum, which again is our second most costly services from our budget. We were then asked to identify any personnel changes for calendar years 2018-2019. In 2017, the Adams Board experienced 3 staff retirements or upcoming retirements, and we fully plan to replace those positions. Those individuals, one of whom you have great respect for, had long-standing services with the Adams Board. We are staffing for 2018. One of my goals is to take a look at our current table of organization in tandem with a very significant paradigm shift that our contract providers will be enduring, and that's titled Behavioral Health Redesign, some of which I've mentioned when I've had the floor as part of the Health and Human Service Committee of the Council, but I certainly would hope to be invited back as Behavioral Health Redesign is implemented fully in January of 2018, and then the carve-in of July 1st of 2018 for the agencies. We were then asked to illustrate some primary concerns or issues that the Adams Board system will be facing. In our opinion, Medicaid expansion. If there is any alteration or elimination of this tremendous benefit that was afforded to individuals who otherwise would not qualify for Medicaid, it would be extremely, devastating for our system. It would then cause the Adams Board to shift dollars that are currently dedicated to non-Medicaid or other services not covered by insurance to go back to ensure that those that are now covered by through the expansion receive and retain the needed services. So that is, we are watching that language and discussion on a federal level very closely. And for us who pray a lot, we're praying. The other would be to ensure that we have adequate funding for mental health services. Admittingly, we have been concentrating very heavily in response to our heroin crisis, not at the expense of, but it could easily be perceived at the expense of acknowledging the significant portion of our continuum of care, and that's mental health crisis services. Mental health services, I apologize. And again, even in the midst of our heroin crisis. I was told that I had 5 minutes. I've been practicing in front of my dog. He said I did pretty well. So I then will turn it over to Council for questions that you may have, and I hope to be prepared to respond.
Councilman Tuma.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here this morning and for keeping your comments specific. Just as an aside, the last slide that you showed, I'm not going to ask you to go back if you can't do it, but the last slide that you showed, if there is a alteration of the Medicaid dollars, you mentioned the shifting of services. What would be the effect of that, the practical effect of what you guys do on a daily basis? What would be the effect of that?
One of our largest funded portions in our continuum is detox, and then second to that, crisis, and third, residential, all of which are not currently covered by Medicaid and other insurance carriers. What that would require is that we then take those dollars and make sure that those individuals who are currently receiving treatment, such as intensive outpatient for substance use disorders and or psychiatric care for their mental illness, that they sustain those treatments. That's a tough call to make, to be able to shift from a housing resource, if you will, and not allow growth in residential to ensure that needed treatment for individuals are sustained and maintained. I hope that answered your question.
No, you did. Thank you. Thank you.
Ms. Conwell?
Through the chair to Valeria, in light of both an increase in the mental health services needs as well as the opiate rise, how are you balancing that?
To Councilwoman Conwell, very delicately and admittingly, we're having a tough time. What we do know is that wherever we can realize dollars through our contracts, we're going to move those unspent dollars into needed treatment in calendar year 2018. The Adams Board would not be aware of that because agencies are allowed to bill up until March of the following year. So those dollars will not be fully known or recognized to the Adams Board until the second quarter of calendar year 2018. Those are dollars that are dedicated towards treatment. And if the agency did not bill those unspent dollars that were a part of their allocation, those dollars would then be used. That, frankly, is how we were able to support many new initiatives as a result of the opioid and heroin crisis. From previous years, as Medicaid expansion came in, we were able to shift some of those otherwise public board dollars that were for treatment to those that are not covered by Medicaid. Does that make sense?
Yes. Thank you.
Ms. Brown?
Thank you, Mr. My colleague and I were reviewing the additional information in the back as it relates to the sober housing, and correct me if I'm wrong. When he had the presentation in front of the HHS committee, the sober housing dollars are gender specific. So the sober housing is for the male population.
To Councilwoman Brown, no, sober dollars are not gender specific.
Okay.
They are for men and women. The dollars that are afforded to those sober housing environments help to offset the day rate that a person admitted into sober housing or selecting sober housing as one of their options through their recovery journey. We pay the difference in what they can afford.
Okay, so there was a point during the presentation where we discussed the need for women to have an equivalent option that right now is only afforded to men. Can you clarify that for me?
I certainly can, Councilwoman Brown. Actually, when we took a look at the number of residential treatment and sober and recovery housing options by gender, and actually this was, while we do support gambling as one of our prevention initiatives, I did bet the chief that we had more male beds, and the bet was peanut M&Ms, that we had more male beds than we had female beds. And actually we fund more female beds than we do male beds.
Okay, so with that, was that the teenage housing? I remember remember specifically, and so the point I'm getting at is: are there additional dollars required to balance that effort that is being addressed with the housing situation with the young men versus the young women?
Yes, you're absolutely on point, Councilwoman Brown. What we're experiencing for our young adults, and that we label as 18 to 24-year-olds, what we have found is that we need different types of housing for women in this age group. Okay. Oftentimes, these are women who are struggling with addiction, their first round in treatment, perhaps their second round in treatment, if you will. We are also keenly aware that a number of these young women have children that are currently in custody with Children and Family Services. So we do have one location, Hitchcock Center for Women, that a portion of their treatment environment will allow them to bring their children with them through treatment. We want to replicate that model in a means in which to encourage getting a stronghold, if you will, on your addiction, and thereby being able to present to Children and Family Services through the reunification process that we have a handle on our addiction, that we're compliant with our treatment, and we're confident that we're on the road of sobriety for the rest of our life.
So the dollars that would be needed for that, do you feel like you have an adequate resource with what you currently have available to you to meet that need?
In all honesty, Councilwoman Brown, with the allocation as generous as it is to not be a reduction in our allocation, we do not have the dollars available to expand services in response to your question.
Okay, thank you.
I have just one additional question, but it's a hard one, and it's jointly for you and for Walter Parfiowitz, and the question is that my understanding is that we're on track for 850 deaths this year on the opiate crisis, meaning that despite all the tremendous efforts of a lot of very dedicated people, we're still not moving in the right direction. And one of the things that's in both the HHS plan and the overall county plan is to develop a comprehensive approach to the opiate crisis. And my question is whether discussions on that aspect are underway, and if you can give us some preliminary indication on what that comprehensive approach might look like and what it might include that we're not currently doing.
Councilman Miller, excellent question, one of which we struggle with every day in a variety of forums throughout our county. One of the things as noted in my presentation is the expansion of prevention and early intervention. While we recognize that we're struggling with our continued increase in the number of deaths, what we do know is that throughout the county, we need to increase our strategy through public education and awareness of the risk in the use of illicit drugs. We're doing a pretty good job in most of our schools. There are still schools among the 33 districts that feel as if that type of information is not relevant to their student population, for which we're still knocking on those doors. In addition to that, as noted, we need to expand our awareness among our young adults and our senior population. Our numbers are startling as to how many older adults, us that are 60, who are using heroin and or other illicit drugs. The numbers are very startling. So it speaks to the board that our outreach needs to be inclusive of the lifespan. That's one initiative that we will be working very aggressively towards. We are very active with the Department of Health Opiate Task Force. We're looking at other evidence-based model approach, since this problem is not just for Ohio or Cuyahoga County, but it's throughout the country. So we're examining ways in which others have, with similar demographics, are beginning to face and combat this terrible tragedy that we're faced with for our families.
Okay, thank you. It's there's been a lot of strategic thinking going on over the past year or so. I stirred up some of it, and I think in the next year or two, this needs to be a real heavy focus to find an approach that'll actually work. Ms. Conwell.
Through the chair to Valeria, a lot of issues surrounding addictions and some mental health issues are due to trauma, and we've talked about that before, and or domestic violence. Some prior budget cycle questions have been regarding preventative measures, and currently what has Adams Board involvement been with trauma in releasing that?
Councilwoman Conwell, we're aware of our trauma response team, which have historically received funding from the Adams Board that admittingly has been not at the level that the trauma expansion of services needs to be. We recognize that. We have also worked closely with domestic violence and have not provided funding at a level that would be consistent with the mutually served population that they're seeing, that we're experiencing through our substance use disorder treatment programs. So while not good news, it is the status of where we are right now.
Council President.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is just a brief comment, and it's not directed at you, and I'm really glad that you are the CEO of the Adams Board. We've had a good relationship, the council has, and a strong one, and it's glad to really see that continuing, given the retirement of Mr. Denahan. I only feel a need to say this because it's very current, and it's different. But it has to be, I think, something in people's in the front of some people's minds. We've recently heard news, and this is not a response. This is a comment. And please forgive me for commentary. But we've recently heard news about efforts to prevent the federal government from regulating the distribution of drugs, of these drugs, and they've done it. And it's been done through lobbyists. It's been done through the federal Congress. And, we have a problem at the other end, too. And we have people that are drug pushers who are masquerading as business people. And until something's done about that, this other problem is going to be very difficult to solve because there is a profit to be made in selling drugs, and we have to stand up to that end of this thing, too. And until I start seeing some of these people indicted, I'm not going to believe anything's being done at that end. At that end, these people, everybody didn't start becoming heroin addicts and drug addicts overnight for no reason. This stuff is out on the street, and I'm not saying we can stop it. It's as old as time. But the distribution of it and the lack of regulation of it and the deliberate lobbying to prevent regulation of this at the federal level is an ethical and a moral crime. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, and I just have to say, for being your first time before the budget hearings, you did a spectacular job.
Thank you.
And
Thank you very much.
both concise and substantive. That takes a lot. Thank you very much.
And thank you this morning for your time and your support.
We now move on to Division of Children and Family Services. Cynthia Weiskettel. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
My first time too, so we'll see.
Good luck.
Thank you. As requested, I have a few comments. The 2018-19 biannual budget for the Division of Children and Family Services remains relatively consistent with what our last budget has been. We are eliminating no existing programs, initiatives, or services. Within the last few years, we have worked to reduce our vacancies. With the support of human resource staff, we have seen a reduction in the time it takes to hire. We have also implemented behavioral interviewing and have provided additional support to our new staff as they slowly build their caseloads. All of these efforts have helped us to retain staff, and today we are well staffed. Our attrition rate is quite low at 5%, 5.4%. So with this ability to keep our vacancies low, we see the ability to reduce our overtime cost. Other than cuts in overtime, all previously proposed cuts have been restored to our budget. In 2017, we have seen about a 5% increase in the number of children coming into care. Today, we are just under 2,000 kids in custody. Our numbers have not been this high since about 2007 and 2008. We have seen an increase in the number of children being born drug exposed, which is contributing in part to the increase in the children in care. In the last 2 years, we have seen a 32% increase in the number of babies born drug exposed. We are working on a few new initiatives to increase placement stability and timely permanency, but at this time we are not asking for additional dollars to support them. We do believe we can meet the needs of the children and family we are serving within the resources we've been allotted. We are working incredibly hard to increase kinship placement as well as the recruitment of additional foster homes. And we are, as an agency, for the first time, looking to start our own therapeutic foster care to support some of our kids with higher level needs. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. And I don't think that we received a copy of your presentation. Is that correct? So can you?
I'm sorry.
Can you? Have we received it?
I apologize.
Can you please
yes,
get that to us?
Yes, I will make sure to send it. Absolutely.
Okay. Questions by my colleagues? Ms. Conwell, followed by Vice President Jones.
Through the chair to Director Weinsketter, we met earlier in the year regarding an overview of the department, and one of the things we spoke about was the children in county care, especially in terms about kinship placement. And we talked about why African American babies were more in our care versus another culture. And that was because due to the maybe their background in terms of reentry. And we talked about how could we move that needle forward, because what the director had shared with me was if you have a felony or something like that, a family member, the children cannot be placed in the home. And so I'm really concerned about that, because we all know statistics show that kids do better and thrive better when they're with their families. And we also know in reentry population that people make mistakes and they're allowed. So and I know you talked about the state was having some talks about that. I'm just concerned where we are at with that, because I think that would help us in our
So the state has made some movement. The rule is really around particular felonies, convictions, as well as misdemeanor convictions, and how many years you have to be past those convictions to be considered. There are some felonies that would never allow you to step up and be a kinship provider or adopt or foster. And those are the pretty more serious crimes. murder, those kind of things, serious kidnapping charges. Also, we look at different kind of sexual charges and, you know, what the likelihood of you reoffending would be. State has made some movement. What they have done is reduce the length of time post your conviction that we can look at before we can consider you for placement. So it's a slight improvement in that in the past, sometimes it was as much as 5 to 10 years. It has come down slightly where we can start to look at someone who is past a conviction with only maybe a few years past the conviction and being able to consider them for placement and or custody.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Vice President Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the funding for the neighborhood collabs, has that been restored?
It has.
It has been restored. Excellent. Does this mean the number of collabs will not be reduced?
So the way we did this year's contract process is a little bit different than how we've done the collaboratives before. So historically, what we have done is funded X amount of collaboratives at the same amount of dollars per collaborative. And most of the money was given to them for them to hire a prescribed number of staff to perform X amount of deliverables. What we have found over time, we've had a relationship with the collaborative since the 90s. And what we have found over time is that families in our community have moved. And so what we are doing in this RFP process is the money will be following the families, not the collaboratives. So if I live in one community where there are more families being served, that collaborative might have less monies for me as my family. What we're trying to do is ensure that regardless of what community you live in, the amount of money afforded to your family or supports is the same. We have no prescribed decision yet about how many collaboratives we will fund. The RFP is currently out. It will come in at the end of the month. We have written it very differently, in which we've asked them to be much more the decision maker on how they will support families. So in the past, our collaborative contracts were very deliverable specific. Now the collaborative contracts really say to them, this is your community, these are your people, tell us how you want to support these families and what would be the cost to do that. And so until the new the proposals come in, we don't know how many we will fund.
So the concept of following the people and not the money, and not the collabs, do you have a sense of how the movement of the people has happened? Have they moved? Are they moving within the range of other collabs? Are they moving into voids where there is no collab? Give me a sense of what you're
So the way our collaboratives work, we serve the entire county.
Yes.
So there is no area of the county where there isn't a collab associated with that area of the county. What we have found over the 20 plus years we've done this is that when we initially funded collabs, we funded a lot more collabs on the east side of Cleveland. What we have found is kind of a movement of families that need our support are greater on the west side than they've been before. And so that's the issue. We're trying to make sure that all families in this community can get their needs met. And so really what it means is 2 collaboratives might not get the exact same dollars because they might have less families to serve. That's really what we're trying to do, is make sure that the money is really being distributed to where the families need the money to be.
So as the families move, the funding will shift to collabs where the population is moving from. As you say that, it made me think of Garfield Heights. They had a collab, the Word of Righteousness,
right,
that no longer exists.
Right.
So if there are people moving in the Garfield Heights area, what's happening? How do you deal with the funding in that way?
So when the Word of Righteousness stopped being a collaborative, Murtis Taylor picked up Garfield. So the families of Garfield are still being served by a collaborative. The Murtis Taylor Collaborative is serving the Garfield area. I don't know if they'll bid on the next time for Garfield, but they are currently serving Garfield.
I see. That's not as close. Word of Righteousness was in the heart of Garfield.
Absolutely.
Murtis Taylor is not.
I believe they have a satellite office in Garfield, unless I'm incorrect.
Could be. I'm not aware of it.
I could be wrong, but I believe they have. One of the reasons we turned to Murtis Taylor is because they have more than one location, and that was one of the reasons, but I'm not positive about that.
Okay. When does this start to take effect?
The new collaborative contracts will go into place April 1st of 18.
April 1st of 18. Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Ms. Conwell.
To the chair, to the director, to follow up on Councilman Jones' questions. Families, as families move, also others transition back into that neighborhood. So how will you track? How will you track this? How do you plan on tracking when families move and migrate and keeping up with those that come back into those neighborhoods to make sure that the funding will be there to assist them?
So when I talk about families moving, what I mean is over time we have seen our families go first into the inner ring suburbs and then out into areas we hadn't always seen them in. Right now, and this will continue in the new collaborative contract, if I initially live in Glenville and I move over to Huff, I may still be served by the Glenville Collaborative because relationship is important in our work. In social work, it's all about the ability to engage and the ability to develop relationship. And so the borders that the collaboratives have are permeable. You know what I mean? The collabs go into each other's areas. The collabs themselves work as a collective group. So it's not that you immediately have to be shut down in Glenville and restart in Huff. There's the ability to go across those lines. We will watch, the collaboratives provide us with data around the families they're serving, and so we will watch that and compare it to where our families are living. And so we kind of will adjust as we go along.
Can you provide council with the current number of collabs and what their funding is currently now before this change takes place?
Yeah, there are 14 collaboratives, and yes, I can provide the funding.
Thank you.
Ms. Weiss-Kettle, can you explain what behavioral interviewing is?
Certainly. So in behavioral interviewing, it's really the idea of looking at past performance to predict future performance. And so the questions become much more related to employment-specific situations, and it's an attempt to look at your skill set, your abilities, and your personality. So moving away from things like, do you know what the Department of Children and Family Services does? And instead saying, here's a scenario of a family we would serve. How would you go about serving that family?
Okay. And Ms. Brown?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With the opioid crisis increasing across the county, I'm sure it's having an effect on staffing capacity. Do we have any data as it relates to the number of kids in custody because of the opioid crisis?
What we can tell you is that in the last 2 years, we have seen, like I said already, the 32% in drug exposed. Now, all those children would not necessarily be in care. We don't look specifically at opiates. We look at drugs. I will say our data is poor in this area. We would estimate that approximately 70 to 75% of children that are in care probably have a parent with some drug use, but we could not say that is all related to opiates.
Is there any way we could maybe identify that as a future data point with the future records that you indicate? And can you give us a snapshot of the number of kids that have been in custody from the last 5 years to the present? I'm imagining that number has been increasing consistently over the last 5 years.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And then the other piece that would be relative to that is caseloads. I'm guessing with the increase of children, there's an increase in caseloads. And one of the concerns that I've had consistently with the Department of Children and Family Services is the ability to retain good employees. And so caseloads in comparison to retention would be of great interest to me.
I can tell you a little bit about caseloads today. So about a year ago, we made a model shift in how we practice at DCFS. So I'll just give you some point in time data. In 2015, an average intake caseload, which was investigations, was 24, which I have to tell you is way above doable. As of June of this year, it's 10.5. Quite doable. It's a lot of work, don't misunderstand me. My staff are working hard, but it's much more in line with child welfare standards. Extended caseloads in June of 2015 were 13.69, and in June of this year, they are 10.15.
And what do you attribute? You said that you made some revisions as to how you're managing the caseloads. Am I to understand that there has not been an increase in in employees, but reassigning some of the existing members new responsibilities, would that be part of the ability to get a decrease in this number?
I guess what I would say is when we changed our model, we used data to drive that decision. So for a good 25, 30 years, we've had an area called intake that did investigations, and then we had an ongoing area that did voluntary families or kids in care that parental rights had not been terminated. And then we had a third area for adoption, so kids where we were trying to find a new family. What we did is shifted the model. Intake is now considered short-term services. So they still do investigations, but from our data, we saw a good percentage of families that opened with us in intake only stayed open about 90 days and needed just a small amount of intervention, like a support system, a referral to the CLABs. Those families, which are called voluntary families, are now served in short-term services. They do not move to a new worker. Extended services, which is the ongoing department, now services all court-involved families. So whether you're court-involved and your children are still in your home or your kids are in custody, even if parental rights have been terminated, the adoption cases are now in extended services. One of the reasons for the move is in child welfare, the more often you move a case, it can slow down the process. New worker has to meet the family, needs to develop a relationship. Information about the family can be lost because the case is moving from person to person. Also, it requires a family to tell their story again and again. And so what we have tried to do is reduce the number of times a case moves from one worker to another in an effort to shorten the length of time families are involved with us and to hopefully move children and families quicker through the system without going deeper into the system. We're very new in the model. The model really has only been in place since last summer. We will do an evaluation of the model about 18 months in, which will be spring of next year. So we at that time will do an evaluation of the model. But in the meantime, we are watching our data. We're watching how often families come back in. We're watching how many times you've been under investigation and within 60 days you're under investigation again. And so far, we have not seen a significant increase in any of those concerning areas.
That leads me to a several line of questioning. So the intake and ongoing is no longer in existence?
Correct. They're called short-term and extended service.
So with that in mind, have the number of employees that were originally a part of intake and ongoing shifted in any way?
Yes.
Can you elaborate the number from intake to ongoing that are now short-term to extended?
I can't give you specific numbers, but I can send you the specifics. But we had to increase the size of short-term services, and some of those numbers came out of extended services. And so the idea, again, is that by increasing the number of folks in short-term services, getting families wrapped in services quickly, they wouldn't necessarily have to move to extended services. So yes, we have used the same number of FTEs we had. We just put them in different areas to support the new model.
Has this had an impact on overtime, and will it have an impact on overtime moving forward?
We believe our overtime will be down because we are very well staffed. Our vacancy rate is quite low, and so we believe we will see a reduction in overtime. I think the biggest challenge for staff is learning new skills, and it's been a struggle. It's a huge culture shift for us to service families differently.
That was another issue of morale as far as those things are concerned. And I won't get into that as it doesn't relate to the budget, essentially, the line of questioning that I have. Have there been any other eliminations of departments since intake and ongoing are no longer perhaps adoptions or anything that are relative to the services that were subsequent of those departments?
So the adoption services are still the same services. They're just sitting in a different department. So we have not eliminated anything.
What department would that be?
They're in the extended service department.
Extended services now is adoption is now under extended services.
Yes.
Would you mind sharing the different departments that are now shifted or realigned, if you will?
Sure.
Vice President Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to revisit the reduction of the collabs and the actual dollar amount after listening to my colleagues' questions around adoption. I believe it was $10.3 million across the biennial budget of reductions for originally for the collabs, board and care, client service, and adoption. Are we restoring the full 10.3 million, or is it just the collab? And if so, what will be that?
We're
amount?
restoring all of it,
All of
and
it.
the only reduction we're taking is in overtime.
Okay, so the 5.65 million in 18 and 5.65 in
Right.
2019. Okay, thank you.
I would note that Ms. Simon has joined us, and also in Walter's opening presentation, he noted the additional federal reimbursement that we have access to, which was in Director Keenan's presentation as well, and this additional reimbursement was used to restore some of this DCFS cuts, and so that's how that occurred.
What was used? I missed your last.
We found that we have access to additional federal reimbursement to the tune of $7 million a year. And so that provides us additional resources for Health and Human Services, which are being used to restore some of these cuts.
I see, and that's still a difference of roughly $3 million. The 7.7 and the 10.3. The question, unless.
Overall, we proposed $13.3 million in cuts. We restored 7.6 with the additional federal revenue. The other differences are in overtime and children with medical handicaps program, but not within Cindy's budget. This is within the JFS budget.
Okay, and now a more broader question. You're all part of the cluster, right? The chief cluster. Have you made a contribution to the reduction of your cluster, or?
Oh, of course. The reductions were taken across all divisions.
Across all divisions.
Yeah.
What was your portion of the?
Well, I'm responsible for all of it. So.
All of it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But I mean,
from Cindy's perspective, it's
Cindy's.
It's
yes.
$2,250,000, and that's in overtime.
Okay.
Cindy has no other reduction. There is one other area. There's $400,000 that's been reduced in Cindy's budget due to strategic sourcing. That's something that IT and Public Works are working on behalf of all county departments and divisions. It's purchasing in bulk and doing reverse auctions just to reduce costs.
And there are no layoffs in any of your?
Absolutely not.
No layoffs, okay.
And has the starting point contract been restored?
At this point, it is not.
It is not, okay.
And Mr. Chairman, if I might, just for clarification, there was no reduction in Cindy's department, but being over the entire HHS, are there any reductions or layoffs across the?
No reductions in any HHS divisions.
Thank you.
Sure.
Ms. Conwell.
Or through the chair to either one of you who could answer. In terms of, we're talking about the money that is left to be cut is going to be across the board all overtime. And if that's the case, how are we going to manage when workers are going out sick or taking vacation? So if you're cutting down overtime, evidently, if you need overtime to begin with, it's Correct. Because there's some kind of chink in the system. So how are you going to manage that?
Okay, just to be clear, across HHS, we spend almost $6 million on overtime on an annual basis. Even spending $6 million on overtime, we still underspend our salary and fringe budgets by more than $4 million on an annual basis.
I'm not understanding that. So anytime a department needs overtime, so wouldn't it be more effective or efficient to hire the staff to balance it out? Or, it would be at a decreased cost versus the overtime. So if you restored the budget, but you still can't restore the overtime, does that overtime across, I guess, the department's going to equal the remaining?
It should equal, correct.
Okay, so how are you going to, when you need that overtime, how are you going to make up for it if you already have cut and say we're not going to grant any overtime? How are you going to manage those cases or whatever comes? You kind of follow me a little bit?
Well, we believe that our funding level currently, there's enough money to work both overtime and maintain our existing FTE level.
So we're not cutting all overtime, we're cutting the amount of overtime. Because we are fully staffed, we will need less overtime because there are more staff available to manage the caseloads.
So what is the overtime that you will need, the dollars?
The overtime dollars are already built into the budget that we will need.
Okay, so you're cutting 6, so I just need to know what that dollar amount is that you're gonna leave open in case you need overtime. That's kind of how I'm understanding.
We're cutting overall. We're cutting $4.5 million across all of HHS, across all divisions. We don't have the data here, but we'll send you the overtime number for 2018 that we think we'll need. That's in our approved budget. Well, not approved yet.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Councilman Hairston.
In the last biennial budget, I'm sorry, did you say Hairston?
He said Hairston.
Yes.
I just had a question. So, as it relates to starting point, and is that line of question for now, or is it with another?
We'll hold starting point until
all
we
right.
get to
Thank you.
to that. Yes, please proceed.
Thank you. Over the last 2 years, did you find that you had to come back to council, because I just can't remember, for additional overtime?
No.
You did not? Okay, thank you.
Okay. Yes, Councilman Sean.
Just so I think I'm understanding. You had your caseload was 24 approximately before, and you now went to 10.9. So if I'm understanding it, that means that you have the full-time staff to efficiently and effectively go to that 10.9, as opposed to having to use overtime to make up the gap. Is that am I being simplistic?
That's correct.
Is that correct? Okay. My question now, though, is these are very good in the way of operational improvements, it seems to me. It's also better for the employee not to be pushed with overtime. I mean, it's nice to have, but by the same token, it's much more efficient for you to be working with less than 11 cases per employee. I just can't help but think that that's better for the caseload, better for the individual, better for our organization in all respects. When we move to going live with an ERP system, what is the impact it's going to be, and where are you on in regards to that? Because my belief is this is where one of the areas where also technology should be able to be producing huge gains as we go from 24 to 11, and people might get shocked when that same thing happens when we bring in technology, that the demand for people will get somewhat reduced because we're going to be bringing in tools that we haven't had before. Where are you in regards to that right now, as far as the whole ERP package and process? And where are you on the ground floor of this thing?
We are very much on the ground floor. We've been involved a little bit on the administrative end, but nothing as far as programs.
Okay, so your programs have not been brought into the conceptual conversation of where this is going to go?
Not at all. I'm not sure that the ERP is going to help us in our program areas.
So delivery of techniques and tools this is full of my iPad, and this has got, I've got my whole business on that.
Yeah, things like iPads, hardware, software type things that, we have allocated those for our staff now currently using them. We are trying to be as efficient as possible.
Okay, but you're not on the ERP discussion at this point.
We are on the administrative end with finance and with HR and other areas. But
not deliver. Administratively, that's the admin side of what we do. The real work of what we do is what is done here, and so you're saying that is not the real delivery of what we ultimately need to do to be better service providers. You're not that part of the conversation is not taking place yet.
A lot of those systems are state and federal systems that we have to use, depending on what the division is. Those I don't believe were ever identified in the ERP when it was issued.
Okay, thank you.
Is it pertaining to that?
Yeah, I was just to the director's point is that I'm sure there's systems that are required and procedures are required federally, but I'm sure there's a way to incorporate some of those. You correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm sure IT is looking at that in a way to incorporate some of those procedures and those systems into the ERP system that will overall help with a level of efficiency that we're trying to reach. So just a statement. I mean, and maybe we can hear from director later on after maybe talking to IT at some point. Thank you.
Ms. Conwell.
Through the chair to the director, how is the overtime? And this brings me back to the conversations earlier when we used to talk about overtime in the sheriff's department. And so, how is the overtime distributed amongst the employees? They had a system.
So, a lot of our overtime is related to our 24/7 hotline. So, do you want me to describe the process of how people qualify for the overtime?
Yes.
So, each month there's a meeting with staff who work the hotline, as well as there are a few staff who are not hotline workers but do work the hotline because they've been trained to do that work on their off time. There is a pick a shift kind of thing. It rotates through by seniority. It goes all the way through. It goes back around, and then the shifts picked by the employees are posted and used for that month's schedule.
So can we have a breakdown of what I guess the departments, we asked for the funding already, but the departments that would need overtime, because you said primarily 24/7 hotline.
There are other departments. I mean,
yeah.
I would say a good chunk of our hotline is the overtime, but our short-term service workers, our extended service workers, our recruitment staff would do overtime. Really, almost any staff in the building could be called on to do overtime, but I would say it's hotline, short-term, and extended that have the majority of the overtime.
So 24/7 hotline can actually be fixed. So that's the department I would see where most of the overtime would be saved. Because when you're talking about cases, Friday night, social workers call, that's the law on their duty. They have to go out.
Exactly.
Okay.
If it's after hours, it's the hotline that's going out. It's not the worker of record. So if it is after normal work hours and a priority comes in, it is the hotline that responds to those calls at night and on weekends. It's not that staff never come in, but that's not the expectation. It is the hotline's function. And so if there's an emergency at midnight, the hotline will dispatch and they will go out and address the issue.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Next up, we have Cuyahoga County Job and Family Services, David Merriman and Christy Nichols. We get two for the price of one. That is a deal.
Good afternoon. Is it afternoon yet, or is it still morning? I think
it's afternoon.
It's afternoon. Good
Yes.
afternoon. David Merriman, Assistant Director of Health and Human Services. I'm joined today by Christy Nichols. Christy is the the interim administrator of Cuyahoga Job and Family Services, and so we're going to share the response to today's budget hearing. I also want to recognize that in this transition, we prepared comments based on our notes, and so we don't have a written document to share. We'd be happy to document our what we present to start and just send that back to you if that's helpful.
That would be helpful. Please send it to the clerk.
Will do. So if I can begin the brief overview of the 2018-2019 biennial budget, I just want to start by recognizing Cuyahoga Job and Family Services serves over 418,000 county residents every year. Clearly the largest human service organization in the county. We have over 250,000 families. Those families are being served out of our SNAP, which is Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, TANF, which is Temporary Aid to Needy Families, Medicaid, and child care programs. We have many other programs that relate to compliance, such as hearings and emergency assistance, but those are the big four that we know are absolutely essential to the families that we serve. Our overall budget is $81 million, and I'm going to ask Christy to please review the budget because I do understand that some of the information you have and some you don't, so she's going to walk us through that.
Thank you. So for personnel services, it's $35,537,203. For personnel benefits, it's $16,806,309. For commodities, $903,670. Contracts and professional services, $11,889,343. Controlled services, $5,404,093. Client services, $8,597,596. Other operating is $2,145,016. Client services is $8,597,596. And the capital outlays is $80,705.
The budget reductions or eliminations in this program have already been documented or been shared by Walter Parfiowicz. We essentially have two areas that are reduced. First is our share of the overtime reduction. That's about $2.25 million. The second area is the children with medical handicaps. As many of you are aware, there's a requirement that every county have a portion of a millage that's set aside for the Ohio Department of Health's Children with Medical Handicaps program. In Cuyahoga County, that program leads to essentially $2.7 million being set aside every year. We use about 1.3 of that. So the $1 million reduction in the children with medical handicaps program is us reducing how much is set aside based upon annual usage. This does not lead to a program reduction in our agency. The program is managed by the Ohio Department of Health. Every month they send an invoice to us documenting how much we are accountable to fund, and we issue a check to the state. So those are the two areas. The only reduction that leads to staffing is there is one FTE reduction. Essentially, that's a transfer of Walter's position out of our organization and into the Department of Health and Human Services structure.
So we wanted to share two initiatives that we are doing that's going to be connected to the budget. The first one is our partnerships, just in general, but specifically the Aspire Greater Cleveland that we're doing with the Cuyahoga County Public Libraries and with the Cleveland Public Library Systems that is providing enhanced GED and ABLE services to our customers and the residents of Cuyahoga County. That's going to enrich their ability to grow and expand in their careers and the opportunities available to them. The other one is our contact center. We currently have that up and running for Medicaid, but the goal in 2018 is to expand that to our SNAP and cash benefits. And the idea is that we're having a first-time resolution so that when our customers call us, that their concerns, their issues, their benefits are taken care of that first time that they reach out to us.
The reduction in personnel is consistent with what Cindy Reiskettel shared. The overtime that we have been able to present for reduction is overtime that we don't believe we will need, as we have worked with HR as well as the PRC to more effectively hire staff. There are, at the end of the day, there are over 300 eligibility specialists that are the core of our organization. They do outstanding work. They work very, very hard. And we have really been grateful for as much overtime as they have been willing to do. But I think as a point that was previously made, we will do better by ensuring that we have all the FTEs filled so that caseloads are reduced, that staff are able to work in a very managed way, and that we're able to respond to the volume of need that's presented to us. The staff have been very involved in the development of the contact centers that Christy talked about. The staff are beginning to use some of the resources in the library, and they are core to us. So there are no reductions in staff that would be doing work. Our expectation is that with the essentially functional zero vacancies that we have, we are better able to manage our ongoing operations. And when we do need overtime, we understand overtime is still available. We do want to be able to respond to emerging issues from the state as well as from the community. And so it is not that there is none. We expect to be able to do a better job managing the day-to-day operations of work.
And we have no additional requests.
Okay. Thank you very much. And we have Ms. Simon has now joined the meeting, and we have Councilman Hairston followed by Conwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, so we need to go back a little bit just to make sure I'm understanding completely. So there's going to be a reduction in staff or just reduction in OT?
There's no reduction in staff. There's a reduction in the amount of overtime surplus needed.
Amount of overtime surplus needed. Okay, so the number of vacancies that are there and the previous budget that allocated for those vacancies will still exist.
That's correct. There's one FTE reduction that is in essence, that's Walter Parfiowic's position that's transferred between organizations.
Okay. And so you believe that the caseloads now range between what per caseworker?
The average is around 950 households.
Households per caseworker, and the caseworkers are able to do the necessary work each day to on half of those 950 families without a need for overtime, or you all able to achieve those same high numbers even without increasing staff at all?
So one of the challenges we've been faced with are the vacancies. So there were times where we were carrying vacancies of 70 caseworkers. We have that reduced down to 9 vacancies for caseworkers, and as David was explaining, trying to get to that functional zero, with the idea that once we get our caseworkers fully skilled up, as you may be aware, it takes quite a length of time once we fill the positions for them to become fully strengthened in their positions, that we should see that, along with the technology that we're putting in place to support them and help them in their positions.
So the plan to make this office more efficient is the enhanced IT capabilities, the increased training, and the fact that you guys have staffed up since coming here previously to the point where you believe you now have the ability to service all 950 households per caseworker effectively.
So first I want to recognize that a part of our transition is not just technology, but it's also agency structure. And we for many years have been case banking many cases so that the case as it comes in is handled by the employee that is there to respond. And we are going to continue to expand that. We're going to be doing more case banking so that each worker isn't assigned, I'm just going to choose a number, 500, 750, or 1,000 families. Each worker will have the work that they're responsible for that day. So they're not carrying a caseload. They're responding to the volume of cases that are coming in. This is something that we've done in several of our areas, and that is going to continue to increase and grow. A caseload of 900 it's not manageable. There aren't specific relationships there. We can be effective in getting the eligibility work done, but there isn't a true case management function that you're on a daily basis looking at that case to determine what barriers exist and then making referrals. It really is eligibility management. And we feel by moving to more case banking, we can more effectively manage eligibility.
Thank you. That was actually moving to my next point. Kind of managing the caseload, and is it most effective on the eligibility side, or whether it's the day-to-day management of the cases. So I'm just concerned because I get so many calls and emails about not being able to reach the caseworkers, or having a very difficult time of getting a response, or paperwork has been lost, or things have happened. In fact, we've reached out to you and you've diligently have helped us resolve these issues. So my concern is I understand that there's no ask for increase in the budget, but are the caseworkers able to really effectively manage these caseloads on a day-to-day basis, where the families are not being overlooked at times, or not being responded to, or they are being treated in a way that we want them to be treated?
Councilman, our goal is that 100% of the families that reach out to us get the service they're entitled to. But I think we can recognize in the numbers, with 250,000 households being served by us, if even 1% are unsuccessful, if on our side there's a service that we didn't do, an employee is out for a period and we haven't transferred cases, we're still talking thousands of households that would not be served in the way that we all think they should be served. This is why we're moving to this model of using technology and using case banking and some other strategies, so that we can be sure that a family can access our services on demand. I want to ask Christy to talk a little bit about the call center in just a little bit more detail, because I do think it really speaks to an interest of council that was communicated 2 years ago. We know it's an issue. We're moving forward with it. We've had success. More is to come. But let me ask Christy to talk a little bit about it.
And before you go to that point, when did you all institute the new model? Was it after the last 2 years, or is something that you're now beginning to move toward?
We began implementation a year ago.
A year ago.
Right, so the call center pilot began on January 25th, and we gradually rolled that out throughout the county, making sure that it would be fully viable for all of our centers. And the rollout finished at the beginning of June of this year. What we have seen is that we're able to address the Medicaid needs, because right now the call center is only for Medicaid. So individuals can call in, they can apply over the phone, and we can take their audio signature. They can do their renewal over the phone, or they can report a case change. From June 1st through July 14th, on their renewals and applications, we had an 85% first touch resolution. That means when the person hung up the phone, they either knew they were eligible or they weren't eligible. They had that information immediately, and the other 15% knew what else they needed to do in order to have that determination made. The idea is that if we're taking care of someone the first time that they call us, they don't have to call back. They don't have to call you to get the assistance. People should be able to reach us and to get the information that they need, to get the answers that they need. And so that's where we are on trying to provide that. So we started with Medicaid because the platform is provided by the state of Ohio. It was at no cost to us as a county. And so as of September 25th, we began making changes for SNAP and cash. So let's say that you called us to report you moved for Medicaid, and you also were receiving food assistance benefits. We're going to go ahead and update your food assistance benefits at the same time. Why should you have to call back? And so there was some technology we needed to get for our staff in order to do that. They have that, that's in place, and we're in discussions with the state to fully roll this out on SNAP and cash in 2018.
If I could add one more point of context, we have always been, or recently we've been a call center. That's been our model. But as you are all very well aware, we had the wrong orientation. Our historical structure was you applied, we would send you a letter and say to you, be at your phone between the hours of 9 and 11, not checking to see what your work schedule is, your children's schedule, anything else, but just be at your phone. And so the way the system works now is we send you a letter saying you call us between the hours of 9 and 11. That full window is open to you. And we ensure that we have enough staff to answer the calls. And I think our answer time is around...
We're at a minute and a half.
So in a minute and a half, someone answers the phone, and in that call, they are able to go through the full application process. They're able to put you on hold, dial external verification. If you say you're employed, we can dial your employer, get them on the line, and complete the application. We can check a host of public databases to verify your information. And at the end of it, press record to say you attest that this information is correct so that we give you Medicaid, and then your card is sent to you by the state. And this is what we're doing now. I want to recognize Christy Nichols has done an outstanding job. In the state scope has not included long-term care or special Medicaid. Christy, while implementing this new system, has also built a call center for long-term care providers so that people in those long-term care centers can call their own call center and they can go through their own application process. This isn't something the state is interested in at this point. It's something we've also built in the past year. And it's the start. A last point on this, we wish we had it for SNAP right now. Can we just say that? Let's be honest. I mean, this should be what every client expects and gets. We know that. We have said that to the state. Unfortunately, the state has encountered a number of barriers. They have delayed the implementation of the backbone system 3 times in 2.5 years, and they're not ready. And so we have said to them, as soon as you're ready, we are ready for SNAP to go into this. And if your backbone system won't work, let us just take calls using the existing system. Doesn't matter. We want this for every client as soon as humanly possible.
And I thank you for the comments. And I was getting ready to ask you, because I know you and I have talked about this over the last few years about the SNAP program. They've utilized this type of service and the barriers that we face with the state and with the federal government around this. It may, in your efforts to, and I applaud you for your efforts in trying to work to fix things. So I guess that's why I've seen the decline in calls or emails about not being able to reach folks. And so thank you. I lost my train of thought on my last question, so I'll stop there.
We'll go to Ms. Conwell, followed by Simon.
Through the director to Chrissy or Merriman, you stated you are required to set aside $2.7 million in the fund in regards to the medical handicap. So how can you continue to not set aside this funding? If you're planning on using some, how can you?
So all of the proposed reductions that we're including will actually be held in reserve, so that if it does sound as if if it does appear that we're going to need more funding, we will be able to add to it. But we are spending at about $1.3 million a year, and we have to be able to pay for the full millage, which is, I think, 1/10 of 1 mil. That's an obligation. So we just don't have to encumber the full amount. If 2.7 million comes in to us in terms of requests, we have an obligation to respond to it. We just don't have to hold all of the money at that time.
So who's actually requiring you? Is it a state law? Or?
Yes. The state law has the obligation that the county spend. Walter, is it 1/10 of 1 mil? Is that correct? That the county is responsible for 1/10 of 1 mil of this program for its county residents. But it doesn't require that you hold all that money and then you encumber all of that money.
Okay.
And we have historically been spending around 1.3 million and don't feel that we should encumber the full 2.7 million if we don't think we'll use it.
So did they put a dollar amount on what you needed to encumber? How did it get to the 2.7 figure? And can we use those funds for other things?
The request comes from the Ohio Department of Health. It's very specific. It's a letter we get each year that designates the maximum liability that we have. And it has to be paid with county funds, whether it's levy or general fund dollars. It can be paid with no other funding source. We don't have a letter yet for 2018. We have our 2017 letter here, and it was $2,748,013.40.
So I take it that across the state of Ohio, all the counties have to do this?
Correct.
So this is our formula. Proportion is 2.7. So we put that, it's in reserve. So but we only use 1.3. So what are we planning on doing with that additional money?
It's going to sit in reserve in our levy fund.
Okay, so we're not going to utilize it for anything else?
No.
Okay. All right, my second question, because I know we have one more person before lunch. The county's initiative with libraries to offer services. Will any of our employees be stationed at these libraries? And are any dollars being given from the county to the libraries?
As it stands right now, none of our employees are placed at the library. That's something we want to explore. We actually think that there is an opportunity there. It's not something we can do right now given our system. please understand the legacy system that we work in is 30 years old. It's written in basically DOS, and that is not a web-based system. And the new system is web-based, and I do think there's an opportunity and something we should explore in the future. And I think it'd be really an exciting change, but we're not there yet. We need to see through the transition of systems and understand what the impact of our call centers does in terms of serving people when they call us. So I'm gonna punt that one and say that we're gonna look at it over time. Cuyahoga Job and Family Services is not funding the library. At this point, you know, there's been other county programs that have worked with the library, and I think that the key to the library's role, from my perspective, is the county library has become the fiscal agent of several GED ABLE programs. Parma ABLE, this Literacy Collaborative, no, that's not right. I'm drawing a blank on the second program. Regardless, they have become the fiscal agency for several GED programs. And at this point, those programs are underutilized. And what they are saying to us is, please send more clients our way. And to be fair to the network, they're not the only provider in the network. They are managing a call center through 211 and their own staff that says any person that calls into there gets referred to the provider in their community. So it doesn't have to just be them. It could be Tri-C, Polaris. And so our goal with the library is to send as many of our clients as needed to them to be served. They have the resources to serve those clients.
So will that be, depending on the numbers, will that be a burden that's put on the library staff or employees?
They don't believe there is. So we are meeting with them every other week, essentially, to look at the program, and they have capacity to serve more. And we all have the interest to have more residents complete their high school equivalency. But everybody thinks of it as GED. There's actually 2 additional tests that are coming online. GED won't be the only service. There will be 3 services that residents can now take to get their high school equivalency. And all of the providers are saying they can handle more capacity if we would just send more.
Okay, and you stated Parma Library does what? Because all roads we know lead to Parma, but we have a big county, so I know we don't expect, especially in light of the $18 million RTA is going to get cut, that the residents can go to the Parma Library.
No, thank you for bringing that point up. Parma ABLE was a provider that was housed in the Parma school system. It served libraries and residents throughout Cuyahoga County. That program is now a part of the county library system that has, I think it's 27 or 28 branches throughout Cuyahoga County. And all of those branches offer GED services through this new program. It's called Aspire Greater Cleveland.
Ms. Simon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for getting this call center together, and I've seen improvement in the number of calls, and we've been talking about this since day one, so I appreciate your commitment to making that happen, and I know you've worked really hard to do that. So my question is going to be the difference between the number of caseloads by household with 900 per worker, right, household. What about the comparison to individuals in each household? How does that number increase?
So it really varies by case, right? Because when we talk about the households, some households have 1 individual and some have 5. When we're looking at assignments, we look at households rather than individuals. So we don't have a breakdown by the average number of individuals by caseworker, if I'm understanding your question correctly.
So why not? I'm assuming that perhaps the people in a household might have different needs and different needs with your caseworkers. And is this so you don't have an accounting of individuals who are assigned, it's just household?
Right. The way the eligibility system is set up, it's set up by household. So we know the total number of individuals who are receiving services from us, and that would be the 418,000 that David was mentioning earlier. But when we look at assignments, because of the way the eligibility system is structured, it is by household as opposed to individual.
And frequently, I think we could say a large percentage of our households include a parent and a child or two, but we also know that there are many households that have a parent, a child, and an elderly parent or another family member. And for some of our programs, we have to consider all of their income for the benefits that they're eligible for. This gets complicated quickly because in some situations, that elderly resident or the other family member living with them may have a separate entrance. It may have they may live with them but still live independently from them, and we can treat them as two separate individuals, or I'm sorry, two separate households. So this is I think this is part of the challenge of the eligibility management work, and also part of the reason we feel that we need to move to more case banking, because managing changes in family structure and community structure, and really this commitment to having caseloads where a family thinks that's my worker along with 900 other families is unrealistic. And really what we believe is having assignment of really workflow and volume to an agency apparatus that can respond to it is a better structure.
Thanks. That's big numbers.
They are big numbers. I do want to just recognize on more than one occasion we went to our staff and to talk about this change to more case banking as well as the use of call centers. And I have to say that I shared with them the comments from yourself and Councilwoman Conwell that said, figure out a call center or we will. And that was 2 years ago, and we recognize it and we heard it loud and clear. And and I think as you have been patient with us dealing with all the call volume, you've also deserved to hear our status, and we appreciate your continued patience. We don't accept the fact that we're not doing this for SNAP and TANF and that there isn't one standard for everyone, but we are working with the state. It's great. It's a great service. It's a great resource. It's also free. And but we have a lot more to come, and we can't wait to share it with you.
Just a quick question, if I can. So this ERP upgrade and coordination that Councilman Schron mentioned, does that help you expand the call center technology, or could it, instead of waiting for the state?
It does not. So the state requires us to use their systems in certain circumstances, and in other circumstances they let us choose a system. In this situation, they said to us, you can get out there and you can develop your own call center, and I think there's an option maybe for us to wait on ERP to see if that was that would produce a call center for us to use. We just recognized we needed to act, and we couldn't wait anymore. The state's call center had been implemented in 30 other counties. It had shown it was viable enough that it wasn't going to be a risk to us. And that led to us moving forward. If there are future resources that come from the ERP process, that I have to say I don't know all of the resources that are included in there. We'll look at them. But the state is also really clear. They want every county working in the same way whenever possible. And they are very, very restrictive in that. And they don't want counties to develop all of their own independent solutions, because then they don't know what's going on at the county level. So generally speaking, they don't support counties creating their own systems.
Okay. Council President, you were next.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a quick question. So what are the dollars associated with implementing those systems? Because I remember distinctly asking about that when we were transitioning from the Maple Heights Center and closing that facility, that there were going to be some dollars associated with putting this in place.
So I want to make sure I understand the correction. The closing of the Maple Heights Center, we did recognize that there would be technology available, and there wasn't a cost to implement the state system per se. We don't have to pay for that service, at least at this point. We'll see what the state does in the future. But what we did have costs with was overtime for staff training and to bring them up to speed. We did implement the long-term care call center. That's on us. We built a system using the county's own resources because that wasn't included in the state's scope, but we felt it was a necessary service.
Okay, I'll have to go back and review it, but I believe that I was under the impression that we would get some dollars from the state upon implementing this this phone system. So I'll see if we can find that.
Okay.
the minutes from that, but that was one of the things that I think what was discussed back when we were looking at this transition, because it's been a great concern for many of the council members and our constituents. So I'll yield in my time to the council president.
Thank you, Councilwoman and Chairman. I'd like to get your advice on this, and because I know we have a limited amount of time today, but it's a question that I want to get into at some point. So let me know if it's something that you would prefer to do now or later. But there was a reference, and I'm sure it's going to come up again, about to the reserve and to funds being held in reserve in case they're needed. And that's the nature of the question. I want to find out, I want to have a discussion about this reserve, what this reserve is, how it's different from the reserve we already have in Health and Human Service funds, why there would be two reserves. And so that's obviously a broad question. And I want to ask you, Mr. Chairman, when would you prefer that discussion take place?
Mr. President, this is the HHS day. We got to deal with it sometime, so this time's as good as any.
Now? Mm-hmm. Okay. David, and to anyone else, and first of all, thank you for the help that you've been able to give me at times in helping to make things happen. And I don't know who this is for exactly. Maybe Walter, but I'd like to understand better what I'm calling it a sub fund only because that's stuck in my head. So what is this other reserve fund, and how do we distinguish that from the Health and Human Service Reserve Fund?
This is actually a set aside in the Health and Human Service levy in the amount of $7.1 million. It's been reserved within the levy fund. My understanding, it's where this surplus exists currently.
So if it wasn't in this set aside fund, did you say?
Yeah, it's set aside within the
set aside. Okay.
Yeah.
If it wasn't in the set aside, it would be in the reserve fund?
I believe they're one and the same, are they not?
Well, thank you. I'm trying to understand why there are then two. There's a reserve fund, and then there's a set aside within the reserve fund?
I understand this is just the set aside within the reserve. I'm sorry. This should be a set aside within the levy fund. That's my understanding of this.
Okay.
7.1 million out of this $40 million balance.
Yeah. Maggie, yeah, I mean, I don't want to bring everybody up here, but
Ms. Keenan, please enlighten us.
Yeah. Sorry, I just ran up the stairs, so I'm breathing heavily. There's no second reserve for the $7 million in the levy reserve fund. What we're doing is just noting the reserve on balance. So it's just a statement that we are identifying we might have to pay these expenses. But it's not two separate reserve funds.
It's not.
No.
But it exists and has $7 million some plus dollars in it.
No, it's so the levy, we have two levy subfunds that comprise the levy fund. And there's, at the end of next year, we're projecting $47 million, or maybe it's the end of this year, I forget, $47 million in the levy subfund. That's the only pot of cash we have. So there's no extra $7 million. The reserve on balance is just denotes that we might have these expenses next year. It's like the bond guarantee that we do in the general fund. So we don't have that, I am like really out of breath. We don't have an extra $1 million for the bond guarantee, but it's just on paper that, hey, of the $100 million sitting in the general fund reserves, we might have to pay this. And that's what we're doing with the reserve on balance and the levies. It's like a alert.
It's an alert. Okay, we'll call it an alert from now on then.
Okay, it's not. Yeah, it's not a separate fund.
Yes. Okay. All right. It's an alert.
It's an alert.
Thank you. Question on that point.
Okay, Ms. Conwell, on the alert.
So, right, through the chair to Maggie. So, since it's one fund, we got it established that it's one fund, and then council stated that in that reserve fund, we should reserve it, and I don't remember the percentage now, 10% or something like that.
10%, minimum of 10%.
Is that $7 million part of that 10%?
It is. So I don't have the schedules right in front of me, but I believe at the end of 2018, we're projecting that we'll have a oh, thank you.
You're getting all kind of help today.
I know. We'll have a cash balance of 20%. So at the end of next year, we're thinking that the cash balance is going to still be around $47 million, which is 20% of total expenditures. What the reserve says is, particularly when we're talking about maybe having to dip into the reserves to pay for other expenses, if there's, something comes up throughout the year, the reserve on balance that we've put in, the alert says, yeah, you have $47 million sitting there, but I want you to keep in the back of your mind that we have made some assumption in this budget that might cost us the $7 million. Because for whatever reason, maybe we're not going to be able to do what we say we're going to do, and we're going to need to dip into that. So the reason we put the reserve on balance is because I want you to look at this and say, the bank account says $47 million, but really it's 40. And we will still be above 10% if we're at 40. We'll be at about 16%. Someone can check my math, but it will be well above the 10% minimum, even if we draw down the 7.
So that 7%, you would need that still to, looking at that $40 million, the 7 we keep out of our head only for HHS possible needs?
Correct.
Okay, and so we still, in that 40 pot, have to consider our 10% or whatever we put for emergency for...
Correct. So the entire cash reserve in the levy should be looked at from council's perspective as this is what we use in case of emergency. It's our savings account. And the nature of these services is such that any given year, if David gets an influx of people for food assistance, for welfare, for anything, we need to dip into our balance because we're certainly not going to say, come back next year, the budget's been set. So that's why we maintain this reserve. The 10% that's required by code says that we need to be mindful of the fact that at any time we should have at least 10%, which is, in my perspective, a very healthy reserve in the general fund, because then you always do have that cushion. If you wanted to come up with new programs, new initiatives, you could draw down anywhere between the 47 and whatever would take you to the 10%.
You meant the HHS fund, didn't you? The levy fund, not the general fund.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
A lot of steps.
Sorry. It is a lot of steps, that one floor.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Does that make sense? Okay.
Okay, a couple quick, okay, thank you very much. Couple quick questions for Director Merriman. You mentioned the 4 basic services. Is it Medicaid, SNAP, child care, and cash? Is that right?
It is. Just want to be clear that child care and cash are both funded by TANF. Child care is its own program. Cash, or Ohio Works First, is the other program by technical title.
Okay. And is case banking different from the phone call system?
They support one another. Case banking it's an organizational structure where instead of assigning cases to a specific person, you have a sense of how many what the case activity is, and then you staff to respond to that activity. And then
you mean people don't have individual people on their caseload. There's a group of people that are served by a group of staff. Is that the concept?
That's the concept, and part of what Christy was talking about was that some of the technology changes, it's changing the profile of the worker so that each worker isn't limited to just looking at the 1,000 cases assigned to them. Each worker is allowed to look at any case. And so that when they pick up the phone, the person on the other side can expect they're going to be served.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to try to squeeze in the Office of Child Support Services. Deborah Watkins, hopefully you won't have to come back, depending on the number of questions. Please proceed. Welcome.
Well, thank you, and good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I'm Deborah Watkins with the Office of Child Support Services, and I'm pleased to be here to talk about the child support budget for this year. Child support serves about 380,000 individuals in Cuyahoga County, and our Office of Child Support Services 2018 and 2019 base budget was developed from using the 2017 mid-year projections, including a 2% cost of living adjustment on personal services and a 6% increase in flex benefits. The overall budget for 2018 and 2019 is $42 million annually. Child support receives revenue from federal match dollars up to 66%. We also receive incentive dollars from the Federal Office of Child Support, a state allocation, dollars from the Health and Human Services levy, and administrative fees that are paid by parents. For the 2018 and 2019 budget, we are projecting savings of $18,000 for reducing contracting costs for a locate service that we use, and reductions in the cost of providing fatherhood services. For the $300,000 reduction in fatherhood funding, we are not proposing any reductions in service delivery, and there will be no impact to services. Instead, we are proposing to use $300,000 of TANF funding to replace the $300,000 in HHS levy funding to provide employment services. This will allow us to maximize funding while still providing the same level of services. We also had a reduction in the locate service that I talked about. The LexisNexis contract was utilized by child support employees to locate non-custodial parents and their assets. It's a bit of a credit reporting location service. We were able to join a statewide contract offered through the Office of Child Support Directors Association, and we now receive those same services through CLEAR at a much lower cost. It really provides the same information to us and to our support officers at a substantially reduced cost. The 2018-2019 budget includes personnel expenditures which are consistent with the actual personnel spending and historical vacancy rates from prior years. Nearly 300 staff members are dedicated to providing these services in Cuyahoga County. We are confident that we will be able to continue to provide the child support services for our community as outlined in our budget. And I will be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. You hit the nail on the head concisely and effectively.
Thank you.
That was excellent. And Ms. Conwell.
Through the chair to Director Watkins, and you stated that we're now, for the $300,000 that was originally proposed to be reduced, can now be used from the TANF funding. So if we could always utilize that, why hasn't this been done before?
I do not know why it hasn't been done before. We've certainly been looking at how we can maximize dollars and provide the same level of services. So we've very closely worked with the finance department and analyzed what's allowable under other funding streams to see where we can best provide the services and maximize dollars. And it does require we will have to, there's work that we will have to do to make this happen. So we'll be working on developing a protocol for TANF eligibility for people who are receiving these services.
And how will the TANF funding be impacted, or the other services that TANF funding is utilized for?
It's my understanding that that there's TANF dollars available that we could use for this.
Is that something that we get in reserve, can keep in reserve, or that's just reimbursable dollars, correct?
Yes. Does that? I'll point to my friends here.
So we received additional funding through the CCEMP program, which is also TANF money, but it's a separate kind of special allocation that freed up TANF dollars that come through our normal allocation. So that's why this year we were able to transfer the fatherhood expenses to TANF. We could have done this in any year, but in prior years we didn't have extra TANF dollars. We spend our allocation in full every year.
Okay, so the CCNP is extra additional TANF dollars.
Right, paying for expenses that were previously paid for through the regular TANF allocation.
So do we know, are we going to get that in 2019 as well? And this is the first time that we've received those additional dollars?
2016.
2017 is the first time we received CCMEP. We didn't spend all the dollars this year. So
Okay.
we're gonna do TANF eligibility on fatherhood program. We're gonna determine who's eligible and shift $300,000 of cost from from the levy fund to TANF. And at the same time, we know that we have more than enough clients in TANF that are eligible for CCMEP TANF. CCMEP is Comprehensive Case Management, is basically what it stands for.
Is it sustainable?
It is. We just got our second grant, and it's up by about $100,000 from last year.
Okay. So, I mean, going forward past 2019?
Yeah, I believe so.
This is the new state workforce program. It's for the foreseeable future.
Thank you.
Anything else? And we have Vice President Jones.
So as you transfer the funding for Fatherhood Initiative from HHS to TANF, it still says a reduction in fatherhood. What describe?
It's not a reduction. It's a reduction in Health and Human Service levy dollars. They will no longer be needed here. They'll be replaced with TANF dollars.
So it's being, I see, reducing the TANF, but you are eliminating the Lexus contract.
The Lexus contract, we're replacing it with the Clear contract. The Clear contract is a service that's $18,000 cheaper than the LexisNexis contract.
Okay, so no changing to their funding levels, just the
it's
funding source.
It's a locate service that's used by child support.
Okay, so no change to the funding, just the funding source is changing for both.
Anything else? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you for your support of child support.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I guess I do. I got a question kind of percolating.
And who is it for?
For you both.
Okay.
For you both. As you change the funding source, TANF has requirements.
Yes, but fatherhood is a defined element of TANF. It could always have been charged to TANF. We just never had the funding available to do that.
Okay.
Plus, I mean, the fatherhood program only has 2 staff in it right now. So we're going to use JFS staff to do some eligibility determination on the fatherhood participants.
Okay.
Just to be sure they're TANF eligible.
Help me with the question I'm not asking. I just want to know that Fatherhood Initiative remain stable as they've been over the years. Will there be any type of impact that I can't think of right now on the department?
I know where you're headed with this, but so remember, we do still have the HHS levy funding. So of the fatherhood participants who are TANF eligible, and there will be some, we can shift those expenses to the TANF program, but people who are not eligible for TANF are not going to be excluded from fatherhood. We'll just pay for them through the levies. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Just only about 20% of the total program would be TANF funding. The rest of it's still levies, which is unrestricted.
Unrestricted.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Sure.
Quickly, I promise. When we take federal dollars, sometimes there are restrictions that are not when we use our own county dollars. So is there any concern that those dollars that are coming could be restricted in different ways that changes our program?
Not for the fatherhood program, no, because the fatherhood, what we're doing in fatherhood is a approved activity for the TANF program, so we haven't been paying for it, but our program mimics what TANF allows us to do anyway. So the only restriction that we need to worry about, for lack of a better term, is that income eligibility for the TANF participants. But like I just said, if we have people who aren't income eligible for TANF, we will serve them through the levies. So we will maintain the service levels for the program in total.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much.
One final question. To be very quick. Is there a pie chart, so to speak, for the TANF dollars that shows where each slice of? I'd like to see that.
Sure. I mean, we can show you how we allocate it by division and then also to the program areas.
Great.
Okay. Thank you very much.
We can't say that. That's a question.
Yes. So we've come to our lunch break. Lunch is being provided. Trevor, is the lunch up in the center conference? No, it's in the next door. Okay. So So lunch is provided next door, right next door. And do we have anyone sign in for public comment at this time?
Not related to the agenda. Ms. Liu had signed in for non-agenda related.
So she did speak before. Does she have both? Okay. Ms. Liu?
Good afternoon. I thought this will be at very, very end later, but
Do you want to come back at the end of the day?
well, if
It's
we
up
need to
to
sign
you.
in for the second session, I will do it again. I definitely have something to say about all these budgets.
Okay, let's hold it till the end of the day then.
All right, thank
Okay,
you.
all right. All right. Okay, we are adjourned until 2 o'clock.